G'day, mate. 40 here. Man, I've got a lot of questions, particularly about the lack of performance by the Secret Service. They had the shooter in their sights, right? They had a marksman who had the shooter in his sights prior to the shooter taking any shots, right? They had the killer in their sights prior to the killer taking any shots. Then the killer gets off one shot, two shots, three shots. The shooter pauses, gets off shot number 4, shot number 5, shot number 6, shot number 7, shot number 8. Just from the facts as we know them right now. So I'm speaking at 6:10 a.m. in Los Angeles on July 14. So when you look at the video, the sharpshooter had the guy in his sights, and he let the guy get off 8 shots before the sharpshooter responded. So I'm just curious, why did the Secret Service sharpshooter allow the guy to get off 8 shots at Donald Trump before he even bothered to respond? I mean, so many questions, right? Why did they leave the roof wide open, just 140 yards with a clear shot to Donald Trump, right? We know that Secret Service snipers had their eyes on the shooter, right? The man had a gun. People were screaming for minutes prior that there was a shooter, a guy with a gun on a roof. And why did law enforcement do nothing? Why didn't they try to protect the president, right? And then why did the Secret Service wait for him to take shots, right? So here's the conservative treehouse. I'm not going to narrate what you can witness with your own eyes and ears. The camera lens is pointing toward 2 U.S. Secret Service protective detail snipers on the roof behind Donald Trump. One is a spotter. Turn on the sound. You can clearly see both the U.S. Secret Service spot the shooter, do nothing, wait for the shooter to get off his 8 shots, and then respond. I mean, is that the protocol? You allow an assassin to get off all his shots, and then you decide to take him out.
And you know, that's a little bit old, that chart. That chart's a couple of months old, and if you want to really see something that's said, take a look at what happened.
So the Secret Service, just from this video, had the shooter in their sights for at least 10 seconds prior to the shooter opening fire, and they did nothing. They just stayed there, did absolutely nothing, allowed the guy with a gun 140 yards away from the president take 8 shots.
And you know, that's a little bit old, that chart. That chart's a couple of months old, and if you want to really see something that's said, take a look at what happened.
So I'm just curious, why did the U.S. Secret Service allow him to get off 8 shots? So you're just looking at the facts on the ground right now, right? It looks like the Secret Service was happy to allow the assassination of Donald Trump, and they only did the bare minimum that could be expected to appear professional. Now, I do not believe for a second that the truth is what it looks to be, right? I do not believe for a second that the U.S. Secret Service was in on this assassination. I just believe that the sheer depth and width of their incompetence just makes it look that way. But I believe that incompetence usually explains these things far more than any conspiracy. But just looking at the facts, where they had the shooter in their sights for many seconds prior to the shooter taking any shots, it sure looks like they were in on the assassination. And I don't believe that's true for a second. I'm just saying the depth, the breadth, the width, the height, the depths of their incompetence makes it look like they were in on this assassination attempt, which I do not believe for 1 second. I'm just talking about the sheer amount of incompetence. And now the FBI is leading the way in investigating this, the same field office that led the way in investigating Hunter Biden and essentially exonerating him. Maybe they'll have as much success investigating this incident as they had with the mass shooter in Las Vegas, where they couldn't figure out why on earth he decided to open fire and slaughter over 50 people at a country music concert. Well, at least they're getting close to meeting their diversity quotas. So you've got these tiny women trying to protect Donald Trump. So Donald Trump is 250 pounds, and these little women are a key part of his protection detail, and obviously they're too small to be able to protect the president adequately from getting shot. So his, I don't often agree with Dan Bongino. He's often a little too conspiratorial for me, but here he is on Fox News just a few minutes ago.
Shout to me right away. Dan said we got to have Dan on tomorrow. You're the perfect person to speak to this. Dan Bongino, take it away.
Well, it's good to see you guys again.
Good to see you.
Let's just put out up front that an uneventful failure, Pete, as you know from your military experience, is not a success. I say that because the Secret Service spokesman, seeming to take some kind of a victory lap here, that they added resources, is quite bizarre. And I can tell you, and I can confirm on your airways, absolutely on my honor and integrity, that what he's saying from a macro picture, maybe from a micro picture, Pete, in other words, about that specific site, maybe he's pigeonholing the truth, but the macro picture about multiple requests for a larger security footprint around Donald Trump due to the enhanced threat level, that is absolutely categorically false. I would never say this on your airwaves, on my show, or anywhere else. I know it from people directly involved. I could give you direct quotes from the failed Secret Service Director Kim Cheadle herself when they were asked about Mar-a-Lago security being enhanced. I could tell you direct quotes where she not only rebuffed it, but mocked it, saying things like, I don't secure nightclubs. This happened. Now, I'm going to tell you something. They better be very careful about what they say in the coming days, because there are people out there who know. I know they know because they told me. They know absolutely that. So this is how.
Oh, come on. Let's
Come
go
on,
back.
man.
We are going to work.
For the president, there's nobody I'd want securing my husband more than Dan Bongino.
He would know, and there's no. He's right to point out the macro, micro. We always play that pigeonholing game.
Okay, let's have a look at more points that struck me about this story. Okay, new footage shows Trump rally attendees desperately shouting to law enforcement there was someone with a gun on top of a structure. So I am not a security maven, but normally police will shoot to kill anyone who is waving a gun around or aiming a gun and threatening the lives of innocent people, right? That's normal police procedure. You simply pull out a gun and start aiming it. The normal police response to that protocol is you shoot and kill. But that was not the U.S. Secret Service response. Their response was to wait for the guy to get off 8 shots, and then they decided to take him out. Normal law enforcement protocol is that you shoot and kill the guy prior to him getting off 8 shots. And why on earth were people yelling for minutes that there was someone with a gun up on a roof? Like, why was there no law enforcement on that roof? Right, I'm not the world's greatest security expert, but even I know that you don't allow a rooftop just 140 yards away from a president with a direct line of sight and do nothing, have no law enforcement on top of that roof. Right, who gave the order for the entire Secret Service protective detail to ignore the elevated position with line of sight within 150 yards, not put a counter sniper or surveillance on the exact position that was the most obvious place from which to launch an assassination attempt? Right, it's such a stunning level of incompetence that the human mind does not want to go to that explanation. The human mind naturally goes to the explanation that the Secret Service was in on the hit. And I don't believe for a second that's true, but that is the way that any normal human mind operates when you just look at the evidence as we have it right now. So the shooter shimmied up to the top of this building, then army crawled to his final position on the roof, all with a rifle in hand. He lined up his shot. People clearly noticing him, attempting to flag cops and Secret Service, whoever would listen. Right, and law enforcement did nothing. Right, a competent private security detail would have acted more effectively than the Secret Service here. And if you say that Donald Trump is a threat to democracy, then you can't complain about what happened, right? The Democrats' primary line of attack on Donald Trump is that he is a threat to democracy. If Donald Trump is a threat to democracy, then you are seeking to have him killed, right? If Donald Trump is a threat to democracy, killing him is the right thing to do. Just as if abortion is murder, then killing people who perform abortions is the right thing to do. Now, I don't believe that abortion is murder, and so I don't believe that you should kill people who perform abortions, right? If you say that Donald Trump is Hitler, then you're saying that killing him is the right thing to do. So the primary line of attack by Democrats on Donald Trump is that he's a threat to democracy. So if the Democrats had any integrity, they would simply lament that the assassin didn't carry out their wishes, right? The Secret Service, the FBI, had a clear shot to the would-be assassin from rooftop vantage point, and they failed to take him out, right? The roof wasn't manned. Donald Trump got shot. Agents couldn't move the podium for a clear exit. Agents were too short to provide cover to Donald Trump. Stairs were too narrow for escape in a huddle. They left Donald Trump exposed to potential second and third shooter. And we had many Democrat Congress people introduce legislation a month ago to strip Donald Trump from his Secret Service protection. So I respect these Democrats because at least they have integrity, right? At least they have the courage of their convictions. They want Donald Trump assassinated, and they did everything that they could to elevate the chances of Donald Trump's assassination. So my first question is, why did the police sniper not shoot the killer till the killer had squeezed off at least 8 shots, right? The 2 officers on the roof need to be investigated. The one laying down had a shot lined up, but he did not take it before the shooter successfully fired 8 shots, right? This led to a dead Trump supporter, 2 in critical condition, and the former president of the United States in critical condition. So I'm just curious why this guy did not take out the shooter before the shooter killed people, right? You had him lined up many seconds before the guy starts taking any shots, but you do nothing. You allow him to get off 8 shots, right? With a pause between shots 3 and 4, you allow him to get 8 shots off, and then you decide to take action. So is that Secret Service protocol allow assassins to have one free go, get off as many shots as they can before you decide to take him out? Well, at least the Secret Service is emphasizing diversity.
50 years ago today, the Secret Service appointed the first female agents to its ranks.
Coming in, I was young and excited and ready for that challenge. That's exactly what the Secret Service gave me.
Voters popped up and I said, that's what I want to do, and I set my heart to it.
Gunawan makes it look easy, but she is the first woman to ever join the elite motorcade support unit.
Oh, great. So that's what's important, diversity, not excellence.
What do we have going on the 22nd?
Oh, man. Do we really need this music? Great. So Secret Service emphasizes diversity. They don't have much of a commitment to excellence. I mean, just string after string of Secret Service scandals and massive levels of incompetence going on for years. But at least they're promoting diversity.
Exceptional agency with people who do amazing things every day.
Yeah, they do amazing things every day. They make it look like they're in on an assassination attempt. Just absolutely amazing. I mean, beautiful music. I wish I could play it. But nice visuals. All right, very impressive. We have lots of diversity. Not so much competence, but a new country is going to be great. Fantastic. Just so inspiring how much diversity we have.
The White House, come to work to protect the president, and then I go home and I protect my daughter.
Wow. Just really, really good at their job. And what is the focus for Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheadle? Right, wants to have 30% female recruits by 2030. Not particularly interested in protecting Donald Trump. I remember Joe Biden's press conference last night. He called the shooting of Donald Trump inappropriate. Right, so how do you get a bunch of non-law enforcement spectators spotting the shooter, alerting police, and yet the former president of the United States is left on stage for several minutes? Several minutes. right? And bystanders are screaming at law enforcement to protect the president, but law enforcement couldn't be bothered. But at least they're diverse, and I think that's what matters.
Take me back. What were you doing before the shooting happened, and then what did you see and hear?
I was just hanging, standing there like everybody else, waiting for Trump. And as Trump started, I noticed two officers that were looking for something or somebody. I was looking around myself and seeing a guy on top of one of the buildings go in between one building to the next, and went and told the officer that he was up there. And when I went back to my spot, I heard that people could still see the person from where they were standing. So I checked that out, and I went back to tell the officer that if he came over there, he could see them. And when I turned my back is when the shots started, and then it took me a second or two to figure out exactly what it was. And then it was just getting out of there and helping some other person out with her child, and we got out, and that was the end of that. And I went and left, and that was all.
Okay, so we have multiple reports, right? Many reports of bystanders yelling for minutes about a shooter on the roof. Biden administration's entire refrain these days is that Trump's election would spend the end of the United States and the birth of a fascist dictatorship. So if they actually believe that, then violence would be the reasonable approach. Tom Elliott says we should presume the FBI and the Secret Service, if not the Biden administration, were complicit in last night's assassination attempt. Now, I don't believe that for a second, but the level of incompetence and misplaced priorities that they show does make an ordinary human mind without a partisan agenda, believe that, right? That would be the natural inclination of the human mind. Right, just multiple U.S. Secret Service failures, just mind-boggling levels of incompetence. Right, huge American flag flying over Trump's head serves as the ideal wind flag, indicating for a potential assassin wind speed and direction. Such indicators are used on all military and security firing range. Right, these indicators would be prohibited by competent security. Obviously, the Secret Service are not competent. Or potential positions for an assassin you'd think would be assessed. Video evidence shows security had snipers pointing in the direction of the killer, but left access to these elevated places unguarded. If the audience saw the assassin moving into an obvious firing position, trained snipers with scopes certainly did, but they chose not to take the guy out. Right, it boggles the mind that U.S. Secret Service is so systematically incompetent that the mind naturally goes towards conspiracy, which I don't believe. I just believe they're incredibly incompetent. And then it was striking how the mainstream media underplayed this story for as long as they could. They avoided stating the obvious truth that Donald Trump was the victim of an assassination attempt. Instead, they emphasized that Secret Service picks Donald Trump after he falls. That Secret Service takes care of Donald Trump after loud noises at a rally. Now, it's understandable that the news media wouldn't get things right in the minutes immediately after a shooting when things are unclear. This is the New York Times front page, right? More than 6 hours after the shooting. Trump hurt, but safe after a shooting. Right? That's just a bizarre headline. You'd think they'd say Trump hurt in an assassination attempt. Right? The news media systematically underplayed this event for minutes and then hours. Right? They don't use assassination attempt, generally speaking, until you get this news conference almost 6 hours after the shooting. Right, here's the Washington Post. Trump escorted away after loud noises at a Pennsylvania rally. Right, if you could go back in time and kill Hitler before he came to power, would you? Right, New Republic put out recently a cover story placing Donald Trump's face on a Hitler image, right? Trying to persuade Americans that Donald Trump is Hitler, then obviously an act of violence and taking him out would be the right thing to do. So the New Republic this morning doesn't have any stories about this assassination. So if democracy is on the ballot, if Donald Trump is an existential threat to democracy, that if Trump wins, this will be the last American election, right? These are primary Democratic talking points against Trump, and they provided all the justification needed for assassinations of Donald Trump. There's no similar rhetoric by Republicans, right? No prominent Republican argues that a Joe Biden presidency ends democracy in America, right? The primary line of attack, Joe Biden, by Republicans is the very opposite, that Joe Biden is senile. Right? There's nothing in a senility charge against Joe Biden that encourages violence. Now, sometimes conservatives do encourage violence. When Trump made the case after the 2020 election that the vote was rigged, he removed all moral constraints for those who believed him. When conservatives argue that abortion is murder, they remove all moral constraints for dealing with people who perform abortions. Right? People don't like moral constraints, and particularly marginalized people embrace any opportunity to drop such constraints. I don't know almost anything about the shooter, but I do know that no man is an island, right? The shooter operated within a context that encouraged him to do what he did. And if the context was different, he would not have done what he did. So let's go back, see if we've got Dan Bongino talking. Well, what do we have here?
But we've heard even publicly points where the Trump folks have been denied or laughed at or mocked or ridiculed and said, you don't need that. And yet, as you pointed out, Rachel, time and time again, he is the most threatened member of the world.
In the world, there's nobody more likely to be assassinated. And by the way, Representative Benny Thompson.
And Stephen James says you can hear one of the Secret Service women yelling, "What are we doing? What are we doing?" as they huddle around Donald Trump beneath the podium. Doesn't exactly instill confidence.
Tried to pass an act or a bill or whatever to get rid of security, of Secret Service for Donald Trump on the fact that he was a convicted felon. They said, well, now he should have his Secret Service removed, even though he is the most likely to be assassinated human being in the world.
Well, Dan Bongino's shot froze. We're going to work on getting that back up in just a moment.
Absolutely
I think we'll have him back in just a moment. But Alexis McAdams was in the crowd when the shooting broke out last night. She did some excellent reporting for the channel, and she's with us this morning. Alexis.
Hey, good morning. Well, first, I just want to point out, because you guys have been talking about the layout, right, of what said that there were police for hours on that street. So it's possible that this suspect could have parked nearby and then walked in on foot. Exactly how many weapons he had or how he got in, we're not sure just yet.
Yeah, Alexis, thank you. Or how he would have known that that was a spot that wasn't covered, or did he not know? Who knows? Also, something to think about. Thank you, Alexis. Those Trump supporters that were yelling he's got a gun probably rushed the shot. Think about it. I mean,
we heard one of them say, "Don't go over there."
Yeah, he probably rushed the shot, which may have saved the president's life.
No question.
It may be that Trump supporters IDing him, flustering the shooter, caused the inch that was needed providentially to save his life. We'll never know.
And Pete,
incredible.
The civility of the crowd, that there was no stampede, is remarkable as well.
Well, we have him back. Let's bring Dan Bongino back in. We're eager to hear, have you complete your thoughts on this, Dan. Just continue where you left off on the reaction here.
So, again, open security questions right now. And this is why, again, I think the Secret Service, the PR, Anthony Guglielmi, has to be very careful about what they put out. You know, he says in his X post, and you can read it yourself, you don't need to hear it from me, that they deployed these extra resources and technology. Okay, well, which ones? You're telling me the best technology you have was deployed and you missed a shooter 130 yards? Say it was 200 yards. The Secret Service CS team, Pete, the counter sniper teams, and I'm not sure those two guys are Secret Service. We have to remember that we don't always. When we go to New York sometimes with high-level protectees, we'll use NYPD ESU counter sniper. So I'm not really sure either way, they'd still be briefed in. The question we have to ask is, if that's the best technology we have, and we had a CS team up there with a shooter that, you know, we're trained out to 1,000 yards in the Secret Service with the counter sniper team. How did they miss someone at most, you know?
Right. If you're a law enforcement professional, right, and you have a would-be assassin in your sights, and you allow the seconds to tick by, and then you allow the assassin to get off 8 shots, it's such a huge dereliction of duty that the mind would naturally suspect that you're in on this assassination attempt.
The way there. It doesn't make any sense. And even worse, it's broad daylight on a white roof. So, again, open questions here. Was there forward-looking infrared deployed? Was there aerial support, drones, helicopters? Something happened too. If you go back and listen to the audio, I want you to listen to this after I get off here. When Donald Trump, after this tragic thing happens, you'll see the Secret Service agents. And by the way, I know some of those guys personally. It takes a lot to run into bullets, divorcing the security failure. So at least they did that part, correctly, and they knew what they were doing after the security absolutely failed. But you're going to hear something if you listen closely. The guy mentions Hawkeye on the scene. He's talking about those two, the black BDU with the tactical gear CAT element, that two-man CAT element. That stands for Counter Assault Team. That's a Secret Service Special Weapons Team, equivalent to our SWAT. So they're there. They all deployed and did what had to be done after the security failed. But having...
So another thing that was striking, I was watching CBS News. Margaret Brennan, the anchor on CBS News last night, kept talking about how Republicans need to lower the temperature, right? So the Democrats and the mainstream media have been repeatedly saying that Donald Trump is a threat to democracy and must be stopped by any means. They are now making the argument that Donald Trump and the Republicans really need to lower the temperature on the rhetoric. This is what Steve Sailer would say, front lash, right? So backlash is after your side tries to take out a presidential candidate, but front lash is to get in front of the backlash and say, oh, it's the Republicans who really need to watch their rhetoric. CNN, CBS News, very quick to condemn Donald Trump and Republicans for not taking steps after this assassination attempt to lower the rhetoric.
Said that. There was no reason for them to have to do that. There's only one entity out there that saved Donald Trump's life yesterday, and it pains me to tell you guys this. And you know what that is? It's Donald Trump. If he moves his head an inch to the left or right, guys, this is a really different show today. I mean, it's bad enough we have to do this show about this topic. Can you imagine what would have happened if Donald Trump did not duck? And looking at the stage there, I'm speculating, but I'm pretty sure based on experience that the bunting around the front of the stage is probably armor. Donald Trump knew to duck. I mean, most people would. He saved his own life. That's just a fact. The evacuation did not go right. I mean, the rule with the Secret Service is cover the protectee and evacuate. The other rule...
Right, so Dan Bongino here is a former Secret Service agent.
...is maximum to the protectee, minimum to the problem. Why minimum to the problem? Because you don't know that's the only problem. It could be a distraction. There could be another person in the crowd. So if you don't jump on the protectee, you could be looking at multiple shooters. So at least that part, the guys there, stepped up there. But the failure here is absolutely catastrophic. And I got to tell you, the Secret Service should be very careful. I can tell you and absolutely confirm from the horse's mouth, from multiple people, not just one. And I saw Congressman Waltz text this out before on X. There have been repeated requests to increase the security footprint around not just the residences of Donald Trump, but the body itself. And they have been rebuffed. Like I said, I can tell you actual quotes. The Secret Service directors completely failed and candidly should resign today. Kim Cheadle has failed Donald Trump and honestly failed Joe Biden, too. He's the president right now. Where's the DHS secretary? I mean, you're blaming it on manpower? So just to be clear, we're a $4 trillion United States government and we can't fork over enough money to keep our people alive? And then you're sending out tweets like, oh, this is the best technology we have. Really? To let a sniper 150 yards away from the potential next president shoot a piece of his ear off? Pfft, that's your victory lap? Give me a break, man.
Dan, I mean, you bring up so many amazing points, and I just don't even know where to begin except to ask you, why would the Secret Service not beef up more security for the man who is most likely to be assassinated in the entire world? Why would they not deploy more resources? Why weren't there drones over? Is it that this woman, Kimberly Cheadle, the director, is incompetent? Could there be something else there? What is happening? Is it DEI? What's going on?
Well, Rachel, it's my job, if I'm going to give an opinion, to back it up. Opinions are like holes, right? Everybody has one. The difference between one opinion over the other in a courtroom and anywhere else is, can you back it up? I want everyone at home, go on your phone or computer now, and I want you to look up U.S. Secret Service, red ties, Donald Trump. Yeah, read it. The Secret Service was more concerned about protective agents around Donald Trump If you think I'm making this up, go to a left-wing search engine if you think I'm biased. Go to Scroogle and put it, oh, you're reading a story right now. They were more concerned about the color of the Secret Service agents' ties around Donald Trump, given the perception that a red tie was somehow. I've got red ties. I'm a Republican. It has nothing to do with it. I just like red ties. They go nice with white shirts. That's an actual. Oh, you see it right now. I'm not crazy. This is what the Secret Service was concerned about. They put out, 1,000 tweets about all of this DEI stuff. Do I know that's related here? I don't. I'm just saying, you have one job and only one job. Your job is keep the body alive, no matter what. Donald Trump, Joe Biden, Jill Biden, the president of Djibouti, it doesn't matter. That is your job. They absolutely, resolutely, 100% failed. Not a single excuse should be made. Not a single excuse.
Okay, and this is not a one-off thing. There's just been example after example after example after example of U.S. Secret Service incompetence over the past 10 years.
Should be attempted. This should be the subject of congressional hearings and investigations, because if they can't do this, and this is the best technology you had, then folks, there's no purpose anymore. This isn't the agency I grew up in. It's not. I spent 12 years of my life there, and I'm telling you, I know some of those guys personally. These are good men and women. But this was an apocalyptic security failure, and don't ever forget.
And you can have good men and women in an incompetent organization. This is why I'm a structuralist, much more than a personality-focused thinker. So I've done very little on my live streams about Joe Biden, the person. I haven't talked much about his senility prior to the debate. I don't talk much about Donald Trump's personality. I don't talk much about personality because I believe that structure is far more important than personality. And so if you have a structure that does not put excellence as its top priority, then you get this kind of incompetence, right? You can have great people, but you put them in a structure that does not prioritize excellence, then those great people are not going to be great. On the other hand, you could have completely mediocre people, but if they are in a structure that demands excellence, right, you will tend to get excellent results, right? You will be more likely to get excellent results having mediocre people in an excellent structure than if you have great people in a mediocre structure, right? It's all about the structure. It's not primarily about the personality. Anyway, that's my bias. And so if Dan Bongino is right here that there are great people that he knows who are working in the Secret Service on that detail, right, let's just say that's true. That doesn't matter much if you now have a structure that is not optimized for excellence. And it's clear that the U.S. Secret Service does not put its top priority on excellence or on protection.
An uneventful failure is never a success. And the fact that Donald Trump didn't die yesterday is no reason for anybody to take some kind of victory lap. And before we start sending out plaudits, we better look and do a hot wash on this and find out exactly how abysmal this security plan was.
Well, uniquely, because you also have unique experience, uniquely you've been able to tell us today that the failure is on both the ground level.
So you had a woman there right next to the president helping him down the stairs. Right. She's trying to help a 250-pound man down the stairs. You shouldn't have women as that close to the president that they need to carry out the president from this kind of situation. They simply don't have the physical strength. If you were immobilized in a fire and you had to be carried out, would you like a female firefighter showing up to try to carry you out? Right. If your life depended upon law enforcement carrying you out of a situation, would you prefer a male law enforcement officer showing up to help you out or a female law enforcement officer? It's so obvious.
On the immediate reaction, the advanced level, and seeing what could potentially be the problem, and at the organizational level, in what kind of resources were given to Donald Trump over time. And as we said, you have the experience to know. Dan Bongino, thanks so much for being with us.
You're a great American, Dan. Thank you.
Best guest we could have today. Thank you, Dan.
Right, so let's take a look at the ladies at work here protecting Donald Trump, and let me know if this inspires a feeling of confidence in you. It doesn't inspire confidence in me. One lady has a great deal of trouble holstering her weapon. They seem pretty weak. They seem shook up. They seem incompetent. Why? Right? If the President of the United States' life depended on the ability to carry him downstairs, and you had one law enforcement officer who had the task of carrying him down the stairs, would you prefer a female agent or a male agent? And the director of the U.S. Secret Service, her priority is having 30% female agents by 2030. And they simply lack the physical strength. And I'm sure there are many roles where they may very well be better than men, right? I think there are a lot of areas in life where women, generally speaking, person for person, are superior at certain tasks than men, just as there are other situations and tasks where men, generally speaking, are superior to women. All right, 95% of the time when a man dates a woman, when a man's in a relationship with a woman, when a man marries a woman, he is going to be physically stronger than she is. Right? 19 times out of 20. Right? You have a man and a woman together of approximately the same age. Right? 19 times out of 20, the man is going to be physically stronger. You have to help to carry a president of the United States away from a dangerous situation. Why on earth would you want a woman in that position? It just seems incredibly reckless. Okay, let's have a look at something Steve Saylor wrote after the shooting. How soon until we start hearing front-lash concerns from people who have been condemning Donald Trump as an existential threat to our democracy about a possible backlash by Trump supporters? We were going to have a conversation about the uselessness of a petite lady Secret Service agent at shielding a 6'3", 250-pound candidate with her body.
And Margaret, we're getting new reporting in that says that the gunman has been neutralized by the Secret Service. We're going to bring in former DHS official Sam Vinograd, a CBS News contributor who can tell us what she's been hearing. Sam?
Certainly. I connected with a senior government official who did indicate that the former president is safe, but I want to talk a little bit about what is happening in real time right now. This is an intelligence and operational failure. The Secret Service and the FBI are deeply aware of the heightened threat environment that Margaret was just articulating, both as it pertains to foreign terrorist organizations and individuals inspired by those foreign terrorist organizations, as well as domestic violent extremists with anti-government sentiment. Because of that, the Secret Service and FBI are consistently monitoring intelligence to try to mitigate threats and enhance operational security. It is clear that the intelligence picture heading into this rally was not what it needed to be, and it is also clear that the operational measures to protect the president were insufficient. Now, we believe, my sources are telling me that this is still an active threat stream, even if the perpetrator has been neutralized. We do not know, and the Secret Service and FBI are likely investigating.
Okay, Stephen James makes a good point in the chat. The mainstream media news coverage of this has been pretty good so far. They've done pretty well with an unfolding JFK-type event. There's no extra information on Poll or Telegram that's being withheld. Well, if you'd looked at the New York Post or stayed on Twitter, you would have gotten the name of the shooter 2 hours before it was released by the mainstream media. And you get a lot more specific criticism of the Secret Service a lot sooner and a lot sharper on X than you have in the mainstream media. And Mike Benz was pointing out, why did it take law enforcement so long to release the name of the shooter? And New York Post released the name of the shooter 2 hours before law enforcement. I mean, how much scrubbing was done of this shooter's social media profiles? Were they taking this long to release his name so that they could pressure all the social media companies to completely scrub his public profiles? Remember, with the trans shooter in Tennessee, they have hid his manifesto, right? They don't want to release his manifesto. So given the overall incompetence of law enforcement with regard to protecting the president and questionable choices made by law enforcement with regard to protecting Republicans. Remember, the deputy Republican leader of the House of Representatives was shot, and the FBI declared it wasn't terrorism, all right? It was a guy who wanted to commit suicide by cop, right? That is the story that the FBI tried to put out when Republicans were shot by an arch Democrat who came out, drove hours and hours to a Republican softball game, came with the sole purpose of killing as many Republicans as possible, and the FBI argued this was just suicide by cop. It wasn't terrorism. All right, here is a chilling BBC interview with a guy outside the security perimeter who claims he saw the shooter way before
someone who was here. You weren't inside the event,
shot,
but you were just outside. Tell us what you saw. And
So we had a party here all day. You can see behind us at the Brinkles Farm and Greenhouse here. We had a party, and we all decided.
This BBC reporter is blind who is interviewing him.
Hey, you know, when we hear Trump up there, we're going to walk up through the field, stand by the trees up there under the shade, and watch and listen to the rally. Right? We couldn't see him, but we could hear him. So we walked up, and probably 5 to 7 minutes of Trump speaking. I'm estimating here. I have no idea, you know, but we noticed a guy crawling, bear crawling up the roof of the building beside us, 50 feet away from us. So we're standing there, and, you know, we're pointing at the guy crawling up the roof.
And he had a gun, right?
He had a rifle. We could clearly see him with a rifle. Absolutely. We're pointing at him. The police are down there running around on the ground. We're like, hey, man, there's a guy on the roof with a rifle. And the police were like, huh, what? You know, like they didn't know what was going on. You know, we're like, hey, right here on the roof. We can see him from right here. We see him. You know, he's crawling. And next thing you know, I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, why is Trump still speaking? Why have they not pulled him off the stage? I'm standing there pointing at him for, 2 or 3 minutes. Secret Service is looking at us from the top of the barn. I'm pointing at that roof, just standing there like this. And next thing you know, 5 shots rang out.
So you're certain that the shots came from that guy on the roof?
100%. 100%.
So this interview was dominating X within minutes of the assassination attempt, and only hours later did this interview start hitting mainstream media. So there's a lot of information on X hours before it was in the mainstream media. So I think both X and mainstream media are useful.
And he was up there for a couple of minutes.
He was up there.
You saw him up there for a couple of minutes.
Absolutely. At least 3 to 4 minutes.
And you were telling the police and the Secret Service?
We were telling the police. We were pointing at them for the Secret Service, who were looking at us from the top of the barn. They were looking at us the whole time when we were standing by that tree.
Could they see
binoculars?
Could they see him?
Probably not, because the roof, the way the slope went, he was behind where they could see. But why?
So I was following this closely on X, and there wasn't a bunch of misinformation and terrible information on X. All right, most of the posts that I saw were quite useful for understanding the situation. So I did hear Margaret Brennan on CBS saying, "All right, don't pay attention to social media right now." But there was a lot of good information on social media.
Is there not Secret Service on all of these roofs here? I mean, this is not a big place.
Did you see? I mean, obviously, everyone when the shooting started, everyone was very panicked. Did you see what happened to him at all?
Oh yeah, they blew his head off.
Okay, sorry.
Secret Service blew his head off.
Okay, just be careful because we don't quite know who's watching. But you're pretty sure they shot the guy.
Absolutely, 100%.
Okay.
Yep.
You saw that happen?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And did you see them go up to him afterwards, or?
They crawled up on the roof. They had their guns pointed at him, make sure he was dead. He was dead, and that was it. It was over.
It's incredibly shocking.
The guy was on the roof right there. You can see the white roof right there.
Did you get a look at him? Could you?
No, other than he was in muted colors, tan type clothing. We saw the rifle flinging around as he was trying to crawl. I mean, we saw the rifle.
Why was there such a long delay in releasing the guy's name? And why was there such a long delay before you had a press conference? All right, you had a press conference after JFK's assassination much more quickly. All right, there was almost a 6-hour wait for any kind of law enforcement press conference after this assassination. CBS News already going on the offense, trying to help Democrats. Margaret Brennan attacks Trump for not urging calm after he was shot. Then former Obama official, who's a CBS News security correspondent, tries to claim that conservatives are the real dangerous threat. So come on.
And he closes with God Bless America, and we saw him raise his hand in the air defiantly, blood on his face as he left the stage.
He is recovering from these injuries now. This was a traumatic event, no doubt, for him. But I did notice there was no call for lowering the temperature, condemning all political violence.
Right. So Republicans tend to be more visceral, right? Republicans tend to be less constrained in their speech. And why would you expect someone who'd just been shot to make these disciplining calls, right? Why would you expect this kind of rhetoric?
And really trying to signal to his supporters as well, not to retaliate or to have any kind of...
So let's be honest about the direction of political violence. Where has it come from? Over the past 20 years, it's overwhelmingly come from the left, right? Antifa has wreaked far more havoc than the alt-right, right? Black Lives Matter, Antifa, these left-wing social movements are directly responsible for dozens of deaths and indirectly responsible for tens of thousands of deaths, with a dramatic increase in murder by them putting law enforcement on the defensive. And yet the media primarily wants to hold Republicans responsible. I just read Elle Reeve's new book on the alt-right, and her concern is showing that the alt-right and the dissident right are the people who are most dangerous with regard to committing political violence in this country.
Escalation here. I just am looking at these statements.
There's a belief in his inner circle that he's under siege after being attacked at his rally. And so there's a lot of every text message I'm getting.
Yeah, and if you understand, then why would you expect him to put out a tweet urging calm, right, when the guy just got shot? And the mainstream media, for hours after the shooting, tried to play down its significance as much as possible. And when the normal, logical direction of media rhetoric and Democratic rhetoric is that Donald Trump deserves to get shot, because both the media and the Democrats have been engaged in making the case that Donald Trump is a threat to democracy.
Exactly, digest it, like you're saying.
I mean, every single text message, literally every single one from Trump sources is outraged and shocked. And so that is certainly the mood inside the highest ranks of the Republican Party, speaking to CBS News tonight.
And then Margaret Brennan tries to defend herself. Tries to justify.
And then the biggest threat that officials are telling me tonight is in the form of retaliatory violence.
Sam, you're taking me to exactly what I've been underscoring, and is frankly very concerning in the rhetoric we are seeing at this hour already. We are seeing some Republican.
Right. Her primary concern is Republican rhetoric, even though political violence in this country over the past 20 years has overwhelmingly come from the left, not the right.
Lawmakers come out with statements directly drawing a line between the shooter, whose name we do not know. We do not know if he's a lone actor or was somebody else, but drawing some connection to the government. We have nothing to base that on at this hour.
At this hour, leading officials within the U.S. government still don't know what transpired. And it is frankly unpatriotic at this moment to be stoking the flames when we know that we are sitting on a cauldron of tensions. We know that tensions were already high before this incident, and the counterterrorism officials.
Was it stoking the flames when the news media plays up the argument that Donald Trump is a threat to democracy? Why isn't that stoking the flames?
And Homeland Security officials that I've spoken to in the last few hours are deeply concerned that this event will be used as a rallying cry to launch attacks against individuals associated with the Biden campaign and lead to broader domestic distress. So right now, the goals are to investigate the incident, both the perpetrator and the security failure.
Okay, why would the Biden administration and why would all of those who have laid the foundation for this type of attack on Donald Trump, why would they be exempt from the consequences of their words and actions? Like, why would they get a free pass for arguing essentially that this guy deserves to be shot, right? You've been trying to make the case for years that Donald Trump deserves to be shot. So why are you then exempt from the consequences of your words and actions?
failures, as well as to try to tamp down any tensions that may arise coming out of it. Now, in this country, there is the First Amendment. And what we're seeing on Twitter, while it is First Amendment protected activity, I will say again, is unpatriotic in the sense that we know that this kind of rhetoric.
Okay, so when people like you make the case that Donald Trump's a threat to democracy, that's not unpatriotic, right? When you essentially lay the foundations for attempts at assassinating Donald Trump, that's not unpatriotic. But when people get mad at what you're doing, that's unpatriotic.
Has a nexus to violence. We saw that on January 6th. We saw that in the attack against Nancy Pelosi's husband and multiple other instances.
Okay, so we have a woman who is leading the U.S. Secret Service, and many U.S. Secret Service text messages with regard to January 6th have just mysteriously gone missing. I wonder why.
She would know. The 28-year veteran was on the team that evacuated Vice President Dick Cheney on 9/11, and she served on then Vice President Biden's protective detail. He named her director in mid-2022. Amid a swirl of controversy over the agency deleting nearly all of its text messages from January 6th. The agency says that was due to a data migration.
System migrations happen, but I think for a lot of Americans, it just doesn't pass the smell test, given the timing and the volume of messages deleted.
Well, it's unfortunate that that would be the assumption that people would make. Our integrity is everything, and there was nothing nefarious attached to that.
Their integrity has, she would know.
And one thing that I've been doing is relentlessly pruning my Twitter feed, right? When I get irresponsible or irrelevant tweets, I just stop following people. Okay, let's get a little bit more here from
failure. I'll let the experts.
Fox News.
Because I was at an event and I was going to do my typical show last night, and all of a sudden we hear about the assassination attempt. So I'm in the truck trying to get things together, and I thought to myself, Dave McCormick's got to be there. He wants to be Pennsylvania senator. He's an Iraq War vet, West Point guy. He's probably going to have a sense of what's going on. And I was struck by a few things. Number one, he was. Number two is he was able to give us an eyewitness account, give me an eyewitness account, and transfer it over to the show of what was going on. He said there were definitely shots because the initial report from the White House was there was an incident. And I'm thinking to myself, how, if you hear those pops and you see the blood, how could you say there's an incident? Having said that, I think that you're looking at a situation where I think the president came out when he said, I got to give credit to the crowd for hanging around, not having a mass stampede. That was something I wasn't even thinking of. People are talking about, like Dan Bongino, talking about the perimeter and that's a failure. I'll let the experts figure that out. I say a few things. I want to know what that call was like with President Biden and President Trump, because maybe they could do a lot in this country, and I know there's a lot of blame to go around.
All right, here's a series of thoughtful tweets by Tim McMillan. Says, I personally worked several presidential and vice presidential security details. Here are some of my thoughts on the assassination of Donald Trump. Secret Service employs a multi-tiered defense, in-depth approach to protective missions. An inner tier offers close protection support, these being the agents you see rushing in and surrounding Trump after the initial shots go off. Second tier is tasked with identifying and defending against mid-range threats from the crowd. This tier is largely comprised of local and state law enforcement temporarily attached to the security detail. This is the area that I worked on. Finally, you have an extended tier which covers long-distance threats. This can include counter-sniper details. People have wondered how could the counter-snipers in the videos not have seen the would-be assassin prior to him getting off his shot? Well, they did. This is because the area of responsibility for those counter-snipers on the roof behind Trump was likely in the extended tier. Essentially, they were scanning for threats a great distance well beyond the 150 meters the threat appeared in. This is evidenced by the fact that the elevated counter-sniper has to dramatically drop his line of sight to respond to the shooter. Secret Service advanced teams would have absolutely pre-scouted the location, identified the building the shooter used as a vulnerable spot in defense, which begs the question, how is this guy still able to climb on the roof and get off a shot? Right, the security breakdown occurred in the middle tier, which would include law enforcement who are supposed to be assigned to the area near the buildings. Right, this tier is largely dependent on local law enforcement and not the Secret Service. So local law enforcement, right, who is responsible to make sure no one with a gun climbed up on the roof. It's this tier that messed up. People have said that witnesses saw the guy with the gun on the roof, told police, but they failed to respond and failed to prevent the assassination attempt. So how does this happen? Well, typically there's limited lines of communication between the Secret Service and local law enforcement. Usually have one or two local law enforcement liaisons who have direct communication with the Secret Service, which means communication on the ground between local law enforcement being told about the shooter, being routed through dispatch to local liaisons and then to Secret Service. Compounding the difficulty to rapidly respond is that there's always some confusion and inefficiency when multiple law enforcement officer agencies come together to work in detail. Most of these agencies aren't used to working with each other. They're not given much information. I saw what can go wrong in these scenarios firsthand when President Bush's Secret Service detail almost engaged a local police SWAT counter-sniper team during the 2004 G8 summit. No one had properly communicated the local SWAT team's position, so all the Secret Service saw was heavily armed individuals with a line of sight on the president. The whole thing was seconds away from being a tragic accident. There's likely some delay and confusion with the initial reports of a person with a gun on the roof, as local cops and Secret Service agents would all be trying to confirm the shooter didn't belong to one of the security support teams. When looking for blame in this massive security failure, I'd say the answer rests with whatever detail, likely local law enforcement officers who are assigned to the area near these outbuildings. Okay.
We'll be watching tonight.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks so much, guys.
You got
Appreciate
it. Just in, Trump campaign detailing new security measures that will be in place while telling staffers dangerous rhetoric.
Threat to democracy because it is fueling a lot of fervor against the former president and his supporters. The other side says tone it down on the other side. The bottom line is that this changes this race. I know politics talking about this after this, it's all about digesting what happened yesterday, talking to the Trump people. That's what they're doing today. The former president, we're told, is in great spirits, and we should hear from him soon.
Yeah.
Well, he is a fighter.
Well, Brett Baer, thank you. People can check out Special Report live from the RNC in Milwaukee today through Thursday. Brett, thank you very much. I want to thank you all for being with us this 5 hours on Fox and Friends weekend.
Remarkable.
Yeah.
We pray for
the golf club after surviving an assassination attempt. Good morning from Milwaukee. This is not the way we thought the week would begin, but it is.
Okay, so I have some more of my own notes on what the heck happened here. So, yeah, I was watching CBS News Saturday night and kept Margaret Brennan urging people to stay off social media, right? Don't go to the competitors. Trump's just been shot. CBS anchor Margaret Brennan disparaged him for not telling his followers to lower the temperature. And they're worried about retaliatory violence from right-wingers. And here's CBS's Margaret Brennan lecturing Steve Scalise, who was nearly assassinated in 2017 by a leftist.
I wonder what your message is. Have you specifically instructed members in the coming hours to rein in some of the rhetoric that I will point out some are using online that is somewhat incendiary in terms of really blaming this somehow on the administration? Have you asked them to refrain from that?
I've already been very vocal within moments of the shooting that political violence is not something anybody should tolerate. But also, I went further and said that we need to dial the rhetoric down. And there's been a lot of rhetoric for the last few months, and and I think some of that, this idea, and Bob Barr even said it, that Donald Trump's some threat.
So when people point out or make the case or try to argue for the news media bearing some complicity for this type of action, because the news media has been steadily making the case for the last 8 years that Donald Trump is a threat to democracy, yeah, those people are making the news media targets. Now, why would the news media arguing that Donald Trump is a threat to democracy not receive any blowback for what they're doing, right? Once you argue that Donald Trump is a threat to democracy, right, you are trying to make the case for the assassination of Donald Trump. And why would you be free of reports and controversy and blowback for that kind of argument?
And it should be noted, many of Trump's supporters on social media tonight extremely angry. It's not going to reflect all of the verbatims of what we're seeing on social media from some of the Republicans around Trump. But to be clear, this is still a politically charged moment as much as it is a crime investigation and a security moment. Many people already in this country very angry at the other side, not just on a partisan red versus blue level, but we cover it all the time here at CBS News. There's a visceral nature to the emotions that pour out on the campaign trail.
And to that point, Bob Costa, I was just texting with Robert O'Brien, the former national security advisor to Donald Trump.
Right. So this is the Biden administration, which is responsible for the Department of Homeland Security, which is in charge of the U.S. Secret Service. So to the extent that there is incompetent Secret Service, to the extent that there is incompetent protection extended to Donald Trump, this is a result of policies and personnel put in place by Joe Biden's administration. Right? The Secret Service doesn't operate independently of the Biden administration. Right? The Biden administration is responsible for choosing the head of the U.S. Secret Service. They are responsible for choosing the head of the Department of Homeland Security. They set the standards, the policies, the protocols that the Department of Homeland Security and the Secret Service follow, and they are responsible for putting a high priority on diversity as opposed to putting a high priority on efficiency. So Megyn Kelly has been putting out a lot of great shows. Here's a conversation with Rich Lowry soon after the shooting.
Before someone acted on it. Stunning pictures here. This one is of President Trump on the ground, bloody, with his hand nearby his face, trying to recover from what could have been an assassination. Your thoughts on what we're witnessing today?
I want to weep for my country. It's just, it's horrible. There are no words for how terrible this is and how more terrible it could have been. I mean, we were centimeter, how far away from President Trump's head being blown off at a rally on live television. And these are moments, Megyn, the reason why, assassinations fascinate people, one of the reasons, history telescopes down to inches and seconds, right? If JFK's driver had sped up rather than slow down to see what was happening after the first one or two shots, JFK would have survived that assassination attempt. If the Archduke...
Yeah, so excellence is often the difference between life and death. All right, I spent 40 years of my life with poor health. But if I had encountered an excellent doctor at age 22, right, I could have had my life back if someone had just persuasively made the case to me that I should try eating meat, or that I somehow needed to ingest meat or fish because vitamin B12 is very hard to metabolize. And a lot of vegetarians are unable to properly metabolize B12. As a result of that, millions of Americans walk around with unnecessary fatigue, mental and physical. Right? If I had encountered such an excellent doctor, right, I would have had 30 years of my life back instead of stumbling through life in poor health. I did encounter one excellent psychiatrist at age 27 who got me on a medication that restored at least 2/3 of my life. So I was able to return to 2/3 of a normal life after 6 years of being bedridden because I had the good fortune of meeting a woman who had an excellent psychiatrist who she introduced me to. I had to take the adventurous step of moving across the country to move in with her to Orlando, Florida, for the opportunity to see this guy. But excellence will make all the difference in the world between a completely ruined life and a redeemed life, between having a second chance at life and having no chance at all. And so where do you put your emphasis? Do you put your emphasis on excellence, or do you put your emphasis on diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Ferdinand, one, they threw a bomb at him, which didn't work. If he just said, we're not doing anything else, but he had kind of a Trump-like spirit. He's like, we're going through this whole ceremony in Sarajevo, I don't care. And when he was heading back, actually going to go to the hospital to see the people hurt from the bomb, if the car had not made a wrong turn down a narrow street that it couldn't get out of, that happened to be that Gabriel Princip, one of the assassination team, was just standing there not knowing what to do, was standing right there at that moment, he would have lived, and all of history would have been different. That was the most consequential assassination in world history. But that moment of Trump pumping his fist shows what a sense of the moment, right? We get in fender benders where your head goes back a little bit and you're kind of shocked. You don't know what happened to you, or it takes a little while to get your senses. To know that what that moment called for was strength and reassuring his supporters. When you're right, how does he know? The Secret Service thinks the threat's been neutralized. That's why they're picking him up. How does he know, right? He's just been inches from being killed. How does he know? That is an image that will live throughout American political history.
Rich, I don't know about you, but I feel infuriated right now. I am angry over what has been done to this man. You and I sat together in 2015 and National Review said, not Trump, not this guy. Here we are all these years later. I see him so differently. Yes, he's got character flaws, of course, but this is the embodiment of strength in the face of an unbelievable onslaught, emotional, financial, when it comes to his freedom, and now his life, literally with a bullet, having shot him in the head. His fist is in the air and he's telling the crowd and all of us, fight for your country. Fight for what we're all in this for. Don't let them shoot you down. Don't let them shoot down your ideals. Don't let them ruin the country. I've never seen anything like this.
Yeah. So high politics is about, it's about policy and ideas, but a lot of it's about emotion. And this is a guy, one reason we couldn't stop him when we tried in the primaries in 2016 is he understood a crowd. He understood the moment. He got feeling and could play off of it. And this is just the very pinnacle of this. That was just an epic reaction. And again, it will never be forgotten. And what you opened with on the rhetoric, who knows who the shooter was. But if you literally think he's Hitler, that's what they're telling us, right? The president of the United States, incumbent, is telling us that, and maybe in not so many words. What's the proper reaction? Just voting against him and hoping things turn out right? If you take it seriously, I think we've learned a lot of Democrats actually don't take it seriously, but unfortunately a lot of people do. If you take it seriously, what do you do? If it's existential for American democracy, for our system of government, our way of life, what do you do? Maybe you do whoever that's apparent shooter on the rooftop, maybe you do what he did.
There is video, I don't know if we have it or can show it, of a shooter. Forgive me, we don't know that this is the shooter, of what appears to be a man lying on a rooftop nearby. And the reports online are that that's the shooter and he's dead. He's motionless and he's lying down.
Okay, here's an analysis of the female Secret Service agents and the quality of their work. Okay, here we go. So Benny Johnson tweets, absolute humiliation for this gaggle of female Secret Service agents. Look at the disorder. Can't holster weapons. Their gear falling to the ground. Erratic, fearful movements. No show of force or composure. Right. Diversity, equity, inclusion. Secret Service makes presidents less safe. Right. Certainly excellence. It's not a top priority for the Biden administration, the Department of Homeland Security, or the U.S. Secret Service.
I've spoken with somebody who was at the rally, and we're going to have him call in talking about the security, but it was tight, as it would be for any Secret Service event with the former president, never mind the leading contender for the GOP nomination, which of course takes place next week as a formal matter. And so this person, in order to have a gun, Rich, anywhere near shooting range of this president, yeah. I mean, it does make you wonder how he did it, whether he had help, how on earth anybody was within shooting range of this man, Donald Trump, from a rooftop. All of that is going to be investigated. But you've got to say kudos to local law enforcement or the Secret Service, whoever took this guy out, because it all.
Yeah, so all the professionals say, and it just seems as though just watching as an amateur, their reaction to this was pitch perfect. I mean, they immediately go on Trump. They're protecting him with their bodies, which apparently moving act, putting themselves on the line. But there are going to be questions. According to Twitter, who knows? Things are going to change. We're going to learn more. As we speak, just during this segment, probably we're learning more. But how is it? There are indications that people are pointing to this guy on the rooftop, and he got the shots off before the Secret Service got him. Maybe it was.
Okay, interesting analysis from Matthew Iglesias here. Let me look. I'm skeptical Donald Trump will see any political benefit from the shooting, but it's going to be hard to tell since he was clearly on track to win anyway, and he is poised for a convention bump. I guess the long-term impact is that the shooting is going to convince Democrats that the shooting, rather than their own decision taken days earlier to not bother nominating a candidate who can run a campaign, is why Trump won by a huge amount. Yeah, Democrats have completely backed off replacing Joe Biden right now because this event has superseded that. An interpretation of events that lets Joe Biden and his family, a half dozen top White House aides, Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries, various Democratic governors, off the hook for the consequences of their choices, is going to be very popular and very influential. Let's get some more here from Fox.
Of police. He wasn't somebody who had a criminal record, from what we understand.
Correct. That's
so he wasn't on your radar.
No, he was not.
The FBI now in the lead of the investigation. I've been on the phone with sources this morning. FBI Director Chris Wray personally briefed President Biden and his national security team about what they know so far. Authorities are certain about two things, Dana. The first, this was an assassination attempt, full stop. Second, they believe this was a lone wolf attack. No one else is involved. They haven't seen any evidence of that. The question, though, how could the suspect armed with a gun on a roof get such a clear shot of the former president? This was outside the security perimeter, but still it was close enough. The spokesman for the Secret Service telling Fox News this morning it's not true that the agency refused to provide Trump's team with extra security. Anthony Guglielmi saying, quote, the assertion that a member of the former president's security team requested additional security resources that the U.S. Secret Service or the Department of Homeland Security rebuffed is absolutely false. In fact, recently, the U.S. Secret Service added protective resources and capabilities to the former president's security detail. detail the former president and the current president are commonly subject to threats. The U.S. Secret Service takes threats seriously, and it takes actions based on those threats as warranted. Now, the FBI knows people have cell phone video. They may have even seen this shooter long before or shortly before the shooting. What was he doing in the moments leading up to it? Half an hour before the shooting. They're asking anyone with that information to call 1-800-CALL-FBI. Dana, Bill?
David Spun, thank you so much. And as we mentioned, Selena Zito, she is a nationally syndicated political reporter. She was covering the rally last night when the bullets broke out. She says she felt is right past her. And that's her right there on the ground being shielded by the Secret Service. She joins us now. What you might not realize from that photograph, and if you haven't read her.
So you might be curious, I mean, what does he look like, the shooter? And there's a frequent argument on the right, the physiognomy is destiny. And when I want to understand a story, I often look for photos, right? I like looking at photos to try to get a read on people. New York Post was 2 hours ahead of the rest of the media identifying the shooter. And now if the New York Post is accurate here, they seem to be way ahead of the rest of the news media with photos of the shooter. He certainly looks deformed. And remember, it's socially unacceptable to investigate facial deformities or physiognomy and its correlation with behavior. But we do know from the little amount of research that has been allowed to go on that killers, murderers are far more likely than the general population to have all sorts of facial disfigurement. That facial disfigurement highly correlates with murder. We know that schizophrenia highly correlates with murder, that many types of mental illness highly correlate with committing vast amounts of crime. But these are things that you're not supposed to talk about in polite company, right? You're not supposed to investigate this. And so you'll have these prohibitions, like very strong discouragement of investigating the link between physiognomy and mental illness and behavior. And then you'll have the arguments, oh, well, where is your evidence that physiognomy is destiny? Where is your evidence that mental illness, certain types of mental illness correlate with criminal behavior? So you discourage academic research that can provide evidence, where we have some evidence already in that direction, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So play a little bit more here from Fox.
Her amazing first-person account in the Free Press this morning. She was there with her daughter, who is a photographer, and her son-in-law as well. Selena, thank you for being with us today. You were there. You were supposed to be interviewing the president, and shots rang out. And 6 minutes into this, you said in the piece this morning that I read that you're trained as a journalist to do a 360-degree view of and observe and see what is going on, but you don't always look for danger. I'm grateful you're okay and grateful that you're here with us today. Take us through what it was like in those moments.
So I started, I interviewed, I didn't interview, I talked to President Trump probably about 5 minutes before he went out into the stage. I was set to.
Okay, let's play more from Megyn Kelly's discussion with Rich Lowry, the editor-in-chief of the National Review.
Unavoidable, who knows? But there are going to be a lot of questions. So it looks like the reaction was a Secret Service success, but I think there'd be questions about how this guy was able to get within range. And initially it seemed like there's some speculation, maybe it's a BB, because it's, when you get shot in your ear, it's not just a little blood, right? It's a horrible event. And it seems as though no one else was hurt. But now, of course, we've gotten reports of other people in the crowd tragically hurt. We've seen that video of the Trump supporter who was there, and his emergency room doctor, I believe, was trying to save someone with a grievous head wound and didn't. So this was a furious assassination attempt. And if anyone comes this close to being killed as under Secret Service protections, there are going to be a lot of critical questions afterwards.
We have that video. Again, this is of an ER doctor who was on the scene. Let's take a listen.
That's exactly where I heard him come from. What did you see, sir?
Okay, so New York Magazine had a brave piece a few weeks ago about the considerable link between mental illness and crime. And it's one that good people are not supposed to talk about. But this is Freddie DeBoer, publishing here in New York Magazine, and good on them.
The liberal campaign against involuntary care went too far.
Okay, let me try to slow this down here. I normally listen to it at 1.75. Come on, man. Oh, Bloody hell. Okay, I gotta figure this out, and I'll play it at a slower speed. Back to conversation here with Rich Lowry.
Going into this, obviously they need to be heightened. But Trump, there was a big thing on the January 6th commission. Oh, he didn't want the people to be magged or to go through electric detectors on January 6th. It's because he wants to be out there. He wants the crowd to be big and to have a good time and not have to wait forever. And
right, but the Secret Service gets the final say. The president or the former president doesn't get the final say on how his security is conducted. Okay, this is a very brave article in New York Magazine.
To fear. The perspective of the American media and the liberal journalists and writers who dominate it is that these fears are wicked, bigoted, even bourgeois. Efforts to explore root causes related to mental illness and violence in public spaces are resisted with the insistence that those problems are entirely a product of poverty and need. Attempts to use involuntary treatment to help severely treatment-resistant people with mental illness are decried by the activist class and local nonprofits. The pursuit of safety on the subways in response to fear of random violence, we're told, means hiding, quelling, or even outright eliminating certain marginalized populations. Black people, homeless people, mentally ill people, poor people, as Noah Berlatsky put it.
So in my experience, when some random street person screams at me about how Jews are responsible for most of the evil in the world, in my experience, 95% of the time, that's a black person.
A reporter from the Times of London sniffed, "Almost all the people I meet who are scared of taking the subway are people who don't use it regularly." There is an elite message when it comes to danger on the subway. It's embarrassing to ever be scared. But fear of violence on the subway is in fact rational, even as we must rise above that fear to embrace compassion. The gloating insistence from progressives that they are never bothered by the behavior of disturbed people on the subway does not fit the facts about mental illness and violence. And if we truly care for those with severe mental illness, we must be willing to understand just how deep their problems go and what must be done to help them and those around them. Let's start with problems we don't have. New York City is not in the middle of a crime wave. There has not been a terrible spike in violent crime in the past year. Not in the subways or parks or anywhere else. There was, as in the country writ large, a spike in murders and gun crimes in 2021. The reasons for this are hotly debated, as you'd predict. I'm going with cops refusing to do their jobs, personally. Happily for all of us, the pandemic-era crime surge both rose and fell swiftly, and we're living through a record decline in murders. Subway crime specifically has fallen. New York remains a remarkably safe city for its size by American standards. Whatever our issues with crime, we do need to start from those facts. So, why is there so much fear of crime in general and on the subway in particular? A Siena poll from July of last year found that large majorities of New Yorkers are deeply concerned with crime, despite the fact that the pandemic crime wave had receded by that point. An MTA poll from this past January...
Okay, let me fast forward a little bit here, get to the good stuff.
...about how to prevent these incidents. And we have real-world examples of societies that have developed mental illness policies so lenient that they are a risk to the public. In Toronto in 2015, a woman named Rohini Bisasar randomly stabbed 28-year-old Rosemarie Juner to death. She was found not responsible by reason of mental illness, was allowed unsupervised excursions into the community by an Ontario review board within a few years, then was released into unsupervised living in 2022. From stabbing someone to death to walking free in less than 7 years is, I'm willing to say, not an ideal outcome. Call me a fascist for it if you wish. But the biggest reason I'm opposed to the rampant, reflexive dismissal of violent actions inspired by mental illness is for the good of the mentally ill themselves. It's now been more than 60 years since John F. Kennedy signed the Community Mental Health Act of 1963, which spurred the closure of dozens of state psychiatric facilities. In 1955, there were an estimated 559,000 residents in state psychiatric facilities. By 2016, The number of beds in such facilities stood at 35,000. That amounts to, if you're curious, one bed for more than every 9,000 Americans, meaning that our state psychiatric infrastructure could never possibly accommodate our population of people with mental illness. Of course, there are, and have always been, those who think that number should be zero, because state facilities are carceral or similar nonsense. And yet, after all these decades of tearing down government-run psychiatric facilities, virtually no one looks at the current scenario of inadequate facilities, overworked doctors, and countless untreated patients and likes what they see. What's unclear is why so many people continue to insist that we need even less government intervention and even more hurdles to involuntary treatment. This is a good example of broad ignorance about mental health policy in this country in the past half-century, even among educated people. I will frequently hear it suggested that we're taking a more heavy-handed approach to the mentally ill than we used to, when the opposite is true, thanks to policy. Deinstitutionalization shuttered asylums. Medicaid created direct incentives for states to push patients into barely regulated private hospitals. A Supreme Court ruling made the threat of violence a legal standard for involuntary treatment, and the Americans with Disabilities Act dramatically expanded the ability of patients to challenge doctors and hospitals, contributing to a tentative and risk-averse approach to dealing with mental illness. The current approach to mental health management on the societal level has failed, according to just about everyone's criteria. And yet the broad public conversation continues to be hamstrung by a refusal to contemplate the most essential reform, lowering the bar that the state and medical professionals must clear to treat someone without their consent. The pendulum swung too far. I was horrified by the vicious killing of Jordan Neely, and I hope that his assailant, Daniel Penny, is convicted in his manslaughter case. But if we care enough for Neely to imagine a world in which he would have survived, then we almost certainly must imagine one in which he was forced into care. Neely simply could not be said to lack for opportunities for care. He was, in fact, mandated into care by the courts. The trouble was that he was profoundly treatment resistant, a condition that afflicts many of the mentally ill and homeless. I argued last year that involuntary treatment could have saved his life, but the response to that attitude, in my inbox, on Twitter, in activist forums, was ferocious. In a deeply reported and sympathetic history of Neely's life, published in this magazine last December, Dwayne Blizzard, Neely's mentor, said, "When he got locked up, that could have saved him. But, as an acquaintance of Neely's from Rikers Island said in the piece, we're killing ourselves to jerry-rig what doesn't exist because it's too much of a hot potato to talk about any kind of secure, residential, therapeutic environment." As someone who has written about mental illness for years, I'm perpetually amazed at how many people's first reference for psychiatric treatment is One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, a 49-year-old movie based on a 62-year-old novel about a man who explicitly does not have mental illness but is lobotomized anyway. Casual anti-psychiatry attitudes are common in the U.S. The New York Times Magazine, for example, recently published an article casting doubt on conventional treatment for schizophrenia, based on a totally non-representative handful of high-functioning patients who live with the voices. Most people who live with the voices do so in a state of poverty and personal chaos, rather than the tranquil life of meditation and music lessons depicted in that article. But resistance to conventional psychiatry in the American consciousness is old and durable. This despite the fact that most people who receive treatment for a psychiatric disorder eventually recover. Anti-psychiatry is abetted by an academic left and activist class that have legitimized anti-psychiatric ideas under the cover of autonomy and freedom for the mentally ill. The activist class rejects any notion that mental illness induces violence under typically broken social justice logic. The thinking seems to be that since the mentally ill is an identity category.
Oh man, I don't have it on the right segment. Okay, we've got. Right. The facts are clear that mental illness correlates with mental illness and crime.
Through the cracks, or for one reason or another, and are non-adherent to treatment, are particularly at higher risk of committing grave acts of violence. As has been found again and again in responsible research, untreated profound mental illness is particularly significant in cases of homicide. What's more, the particular conditions of homeless people with severe mental illness in urban spaces make the risks greater. The authors note that patients with mental illness may be more prone to violence if they do not receive adequate treatment, are actively experiencing delusions, or have long-standing paranoia. All of those factors, a lack of treatment, delusions of the type associated with psychotic disorders, and persistent paranoia, are like 5% of adults have schizophrenia. Relevant to our interests here, 38 people were charged with assaulting MTA employees last year. 20 of them had a history of mental illness. Despite the
Michael, Politico reports that Congressman Benny Thompson, the former chair of the January 6th committee, introduced a bill to remove Secret Service protection for anyone sentenced to a year or more in jail, saying it would, quote, alleviate a conflict between the Secret the former chair of the January 6th committee, introduced a bill to remove Secret Service protection for anyone sentenced.
Yeah, they find that hilarious.
Of Americans suffer from mental illness, and only 1 in 20 from severe mental illness. Obviously, it's not rational to expect any individual person with a mental illness to be violent. But it is rational to conclude that the severely mentally ill are significantly more dangerous than any random person. Liberal desires to repair the image of the mentally ill, after decades of pop culture that portrays all of them as murderous maniacs, has given way to an assumption of blamelessness. It helps no one, especially not the mentally ill themselves. Part of the difficulty in getting people to grapple with this reality is the rampant deployment of a strategically deceptive observation that the mentally ill are more likely to be the victims of violent crime than the perpetrators of violent crime. For example, in a 2021 piece in The Atlantic that argues that more than a half-century of deinstitutionalization did not cause a spike in homelessness among the mentally ill, Alyssa Roth writes, tough-on-crime rhetoric also helped enforce the persistent assumption that people with mental illness are dangerous and need to be kept off the streets to protect the rest of us. But people with mental illness are far likelier to be victims than perpetrators of violence. A New York Times piece from November 2023 used the same language, saying, "Likely to be the victims of violent crime than to be the perpetrators. We know that men commit a shockingly high percentage of the violent crimes in our society. And using the FBI's Crime Data Explorer and consulting the National Crime Victimization Survey, we can see that in the past half-decade, men have committed approximately 8.5 crimes per 1,000, while between 16 and 20 men per 1,000 were the victims of a violent crime. We too, as a sex, are more likely to be the victims of violent crimes than the perpetrators, perhaps twice as likely. But would it therefore be sensible to conclude that men are not more likely to be violent than women? Of course not. That's not what that statistic says. And what it does say is irrelevant. They are more likely to be victims of violence than to commit violence is meaningless for assessing risk, and yet it's voiced absolutely constantly, including, I'm afraid, in the PubMed publication I referenced above. Perhaps the researchers felt they needed to include that tidbit to avoid criticism or accusation.
Okay, good New York Magazine article pointing out that the mentally ill commit, dramatically more violent crime per capita, and so it completely makes sense that people are on guard against the mentally ill, and not all mental illness, right, creates equal correlation, equal amounts of propensity to commit violent crime. Schizophrenia has a disproportionate likelihood of committing violent crime. So it's completely natural that people would be on edge about this. Right, Donald Trump gets shot, and the news media immediately goes into blaming Donald Trump.
Will highlight this. Also, George, we have to point out, no matter who the shooter, what the shooter's motives were, no matter who the shooter is, you are going to hear conspiracy theories going forward.
No question about that. But as you point out, those statements from J.D. Vance and Vivek Ramaswamy, of course, President Trump and his supporters have contributed to this violent rhetoric as well.
Well, absolutely, George. We were just looking back this morning at some of the things that former President Trump has said. He warned last March of potential death and destruction if he were charged by the Manhattan District Attorney. Our country is being destroyed as they tell us to be peaceful. Trump in January warned of bedlam in the country if the criminal charges against him succeeded. And of course, in March, he said, now, if I don't get elected, it's going to be a bloodbath for the whole. That's going to be the least of it. It's going to be a bloodbath for the country. That will be the least of it. He said he was partly joking and that was taken out of context. But those are indeed his words. And you have heard it from supporters as well. And supporters are certainly in some parts angry. And let's remember January 6th. In so many ways for the campaign, January 6th will probably be in the background after yesterday's event. This is a very difficult time for this campaign. I'm sure this week in Milwaukee that President Trump will highlight this, and President Biden is going to have to figure out how to go forward with this campaign and what exactly they say.
Martha Raddatz, thanks very much. Let's bring it.
Okay, Brit Hume is one of the first people in the mainstream media to call out Donald Trump for being Joe Biden for being senile. Let's get his thoughts.
He is not. Obviously, the investigation is still ongoing. We don't know the motive yet. We don't have that information, Britt. But how do you think, if at all, the conversation changes now for the presidential election?
Well, I guess we can hope and pray for some relief from this poisonous political atmosphere which we've been living in now for quite some time. And, you know, we live it's kind of an age of exaggeration, in which everything is pushed out to its possible outer limit. You know, nobody's dangerous; they're all Hitler. I mean, you see the New Republic, the left liberal political journal, has a Trump as Hitler drawing on its cover in the current issue. This is the kind of thing that's been going on for a long time. We can all hope that we can turn the temperature down, but the country is deeply divided. The passions are very intense, and my concern is that this will tamp things down for a while, but it tends to wear off, and we're back to where we were. And, you know, you're hearing this said that violence is un-American. The sad truth is violence is not un-American. There's been a ton of it throughout our history, and a lot of it in recent history. And this is another chapter in that story, a very regrettable one indeed, but that's how we are. It would be lovely if we could hope that it would change in some permanent way, but I think it's too early to get our hopes up.
To our viewers at home, there's a terrific piece by the Wall Street Journal editorial board. I know you all have seen it today. Just want to read a short paragraph from that. Americans after Saturday will be looking for stable, reassuring leadership. Trump's opportunity now is to present himself as someone who can rise above the attack on his life and unite the country. He will make a mistake if he blames Democrats for the assassination attempt. The country wants civil disagreement and discourse, not civil war. Guy, your take on that?
Well, I think time will tell. But the early receipts are very promising, I would say, on that front. The initial statements put out by the former president have been, in my view, almost pitch perfect, very human, filled with gratitude, which I would imagine one must be when one is almost killed and survives. And at least based on what he has said thus far, only in writing, it has been, in my estimation, really well done. Now the campaign has to make some decisions here about when do they have him emerge. We saw him come down the steps of the plane in New Jersey last night. When does he actually speak in front of cameras for the first time since this happened? What does he say? Important hours, of course, for our country, and we've talked about that ad nauseum, but we're here in this building for a political convention. It is the thick of a political season, and there are political decisions to be made right now by the Trump campaign.
Yes, it's quiet here today, but it won't be tomorrow, Britt. Can you give us any sort of thoughts about how we should be thinking about or covering our Americans watching here today can think about what to do and think about after a political assassination attempt? Because as I believe you were in the White House press corps when Reagan was shot?
I was on Capitol Hill, that day, and I'll tell you, there's a lot of. I learned a lesson that day.
Okay.
The early reports, we all should know this by now. Early reports are often wrong, and there was a moment at which the Capitol Hill press corps, of which I was a member at the time, was told by the then press secretary Howard Baker, who was a majority leader at the time, that James Brady had died, and I was, for some reason, skeptical, and I was waiting to go on the air, and I heard someone else say that on the air. I can't remember who it was, and I thought, I'm not sure so I got up and walked out of the shot. You're not supposed to do that, and I was glad I did.
Britt Hume did not want his name attached to that.
I ran away.
Yeah. Can I tell you, I'm thinking something quickly about the current president and Joe Biden and what he does. I think it would be smart to do an Oval Office statement today, quickly.
I wouldn't be surprised if that's what they do. We waited a while for anything from the president yesterday. Then we had a somewhat scattershot response by that podium in Delaware. They sent him back to the White House last night. I would imagine something scripted is in order today at some point, and we'll see if they agree.
And if they meet the moment.
Yeah.
All right. Britt, Guy, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll be right back here in Milwaukee.
Okay, I was watching a recent interview with Charles Murray. He had some thoughtful
get
points.
black people enrollment in public institutes as a minimum 10-50%. So, and I would ask only one question: how does denial on human nature and genetics remind me Lysenkoism period in USSR? How it became dominant in the absence of Politburo and in the presence of free press? That's my question.
Oh, now.
Yes.
It always comes to mute regime.
There we go. I'm back. I wish I had a nice, clear answer to that. One part of the answer is that the press is staffed now by members of the cognitive elite. Journalism in 1950, 1940 was a working class profession. A lot of journalists in those days hadn't even gone to college. And they certainly hadn't necessarily gone to an elite college. And now if you take a look at the staffs of the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, go through all of the big magazines, you go through the people who run the television networks, they come out of the same elite schools with the same kinds of culture. They are full participants in what you rightly describe as, using my word for it, it's a semi-conspiracy. If you've been following what's happened in the United States the last week or so, after the Joe Biden's debate appearance, what you have observed is the exposure of the extent to which journalists actively covered up what they knew to be true about Joe Biden's mental frailty. And only now, after the debate exposed it, are they rushing to try to explain, why it happened. None of them are willing to say, we just covered it up. And that's what they did. And the same thing happens with intelligence, with genetics, with racial difference, and the rest of it. They will not report. Now, you say, how did this happen in the absence of a Politburo enforcing it? Social pressure to be part of your in-group is extremely strong. And I think that it's just, in some ways, it's probably a more effective thing to beat people over the head with than even the Politburo in some respects. And it has worked. The complaints that have been made about the American press and fake news and its biases, they're all true. That's the best I can do.
Yeah.
Right.
Thanks.
So a culture
Not
of
necessarily
lies.
Force applied from the top, but
right? A culture of denial of reality that doesn't lead to excellence. And we have a culture of denial of reality. And we don't have
Hey guys,
excellence
have a
as
lot
result.
of breaking news to bring you this morning. As you likely already know, and as Soccer brought you yesterday, a would-be assassin attempted to take the life of President Trump at a rally in Pennsylvania, leading to horrifying scenes and one rally-goer killed, 2 others in critical condition. We have a lot of updates for you this morning that I wanted to bring to you, including statements from Trump, statements from Biden. We now know who the shooter has been identified as. We've got some photos and some, reading the tea leaves of his political history, which is confused to say the least. So we'll bring you all of those details. Also, mounting questions about the state of security at this rally and how this individual was able to get these shots off, how he was able to come within inches of taking the former president's life. So I'm going to go through all of this. I want to start, though, at the beginning.
So why did it take the news media hours and hours in general to state the obvious that this was an assassination attempt? For hours, the mainstream media tried to downplay this event. They tried to say, oh, Secret Service helps Trump off stage after loud noises, or Secret Service helps Donald Trump after he falls.
Beginning with what unfolded at the rally. Of course, this is disturbing. So just a warning before we get into any of this. I'm going to show you the full video. It's about 1 minute and 45 seconds. You can see it did graze his ear. That is what caused that blood that you see splattered across his face. He has been seen in public since then.
Why did so many people in the news media feel reluctant in saying that Donald Trump got shot? Right? It seemed to be a great reluctance in the mainstream media, and maybe they're right? Maybe it was a bullet that hit some glass that then exploded into Donald Trump's ear. But I noticed an extreme reluctance for hours in the mainstream media to say that Donald Trump was shot. Why did the mainstream media feel such a need to underplay this story and then to emphasize why aren't Trump and Republicans doing more to tone down the rhetoric after the leader of the Republicans just got shot?
Walking unaided, and the officials are saying he is safe, capturing a projectile, a bullet aimed right at the former president. Very far distance. So just incredibly fortunate that with whatever security lapses occurred here, that the president was not seriously injured. Horrifyingly, though, of course, you do have a rally-goer who was killed and 2 others whose condition remains unknown, who was described as being in critical condition. Let me show you next some of the footage that has just emerged of people who were there at the rally before the shots ring out, who on the ground spotted this shooter, this would-be assassin, and are screaming, he's got a gun, he's got a gun. And then you hear the chaos ensue as he begins to fire. Let me pull this video up for you so you can see what this was like on the ground, just sheer chaos. Take a listen.
You know, that's a little bit...
Stay over here. So again, I know this is disturbing. This is what we know at this point. So you can hear them say, he's got a gun, he's on the roof. They're screaming, trying to get someone's attention. And then you hear the shots ring out, and we know what unfolds from there. So since this event, we have a statement we actually have a couple of statements from former President Trump. Let me go ahead and read you both of those and put this first one up on the screen. He said on Truth Social, I want to thank the U.S. Secret Service and all of law enforcement for their rapid response on the shooting that just took Americans, remaining strong and determined and not from his plane. You can take a look at this. The campaign has suspended their advertising in a show of the gravity of the situation. And we also know that former President Trump and current President Biden spoke yesterday evening. We don't have any details on that conversation, but let me give you a little bit of what current President Biden had to say yesterday.
Okay, so why do so many conservatives have suspicion of the mainstream media? One example is conservatives have been saying since about 2018 that Joe Biden is clearly senile, and it took until about 2 weeks ago for the rest of the media to catch up to that common sense observation. I went searching over the weekend on Google Scholar. I mean, how have scholars covered what's a fascinating topic, Joe Biden's obvious cognitive decline? And there are no articles covering Joe Biden's obvious cognitive decline. I couldn't find any, not one, academic article exploring whether Joe Biden is fit for office, right? I could find numerous articles making the case that Donald Trump is fit for office. Could not find one academic article even exploring the topic of whether or not Joe Biden is fit for office. In 2020, the Journal of Active Aging released this study, and it's put together by about 8 prestigious doctors and professors of public health. And they say there's no evidence available in the public record to indicate that either Joe Biden or Donald Trump is facing a major cognitive functioning challenge. Right? This is in 2020, when it was obvious to a 100 IQ plumber that Joe Biden is senile. But you have all these prestigious doctors putting together a public report in 2020 that there's no evidence, guys, that Joe Biden or Donald Trump is facing a major cognitive functioning challenge, either now or in the next 4 years. So I've emailed these doctors, and none of them got back to me. I said, how could you be so obviously wrong? What happened to your analysis? And it's this inability to face up to reality, this desire to cover up that which is inconvenient, that causes many people to have considerable suspicion about mainstream media.
Is out there, and this is consistent with what New York Times and others are reporting, even though this is just some random guy on Twitter. He just happened to sum it up well. So the shooter is Thomas Matthew Crooks. He is a local Pennsylvania resident. He is 20 years old, just graduated from high school 2 years ago. So he donated 15, in terms of political activity, he has no social media profile that anyone has been able to turn up so far. I saw some speculations. He may have a Discord, but none of that has come up. We don't know what was going on there, if such a thing even exists. Donated $15 to Act Blue the day of Biden's inauguration when he was 17. That went to some sort of progressive PAC that says they're fighting to restore democracy. So very sort of, standard liberal progressive type indications there. On the other hand, 8 months later, he registered to vote as a Republican. One of the photos that has emerged, he's wearing I believe of him, of this individual, this would-be assassin who killed a rally goer, injured 2 others, and shot the former president of the United States. So those are the images that we have. One of the most stunning.
So the New York Post was years ahead of the rest of the media in pointing out that Joe Biden is senile. They were 2 hours ahead, the rest of the media, naming the shooter and then publishing his photo.
Videos to come out was an eyewitness that I mentioned before, who he lives locally. They wanted to come out. Trump's.
Okay, here's a former Secret Service agent analyzing the security.
Evie Pomporis, she's a former Secret Service agent. Evie, good morning. I want to put up this map of the farm grounds where this event was held last night. So the elevated position where the shooter was set up was about 150 yards from the stage where former President Trump was speaking. As a former Secret Service agent, are you surprised that building wasn't better secured?
So when you do a security plan, you've got the main security, right? The security perimeter where there's the magnetometers, where people are being checked as they're entering the event. You have the outer perimeter, when you have an open rally like this, you are extremely vulnerable. I've done these. They're probably the most anxious you're ever going to be as an agent, because you're trying to secure all of it. Now, the adjacent buildings, you do this in urban environments, you do this in a rural environment like this. When you do a security plan, you literally put yourself on stage and then you look out as if you were the protectee. What can I see? And if I can see it, it can probably see me. Now, for an outer perimeter like that, typically you will have a local law enforcement presence. You'll notice those buildings. And the Secret Service works with local police. You have to think of the Secret Service like they're the conductor of the orchestra. They create the blueprint and design for the security plan. They work with state police. They work with local police. And then they put in resources.
Right. Molly Hemingway has an interesting tweet. She says, to state the obvious, Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, and Christopher Wray, the head of the FBI, should recuse themselves from the investigation into the attempted assassination of President Trump. There should be zero Washington, D.C. or FBI headquarter involvement. It is patently absurd to think that these people should be entrusted with this probe.
and assets.
So in the typical scenario, or in the scenario that one wishes would have unfolded, would you have had perhaps a local official secure that roof to make sure the roof is clear, make sure nobody's in the building, and then stand guard there so no one comes in after that clearing?
So we don't know if they did or did not do this.
Yes, but they should have.
I would presume you should have a local police presence in that area. Now, could you have put somebody on that rooftop? You could have. The other.
Okay, let's bring Stephen J. James onto the show. Stephen, long time no talk. How's it going, man? What are your thoughts?
Hey, Luke. I just thought I'd pop in. I've been listening to you whilst I was out. Been having dinner with my parents today. And I was just commenting in your chat. I was actually leaving the door open for some actual credentialed political commentators to come in here and give some really captivating political thoughts. But I guess you're stuck with me, Luke.
Okay, stuck in the middle with Stephen J. James.
Yeah. So look, just on an aside, I would have loved to have heard today Brundlefly to come storming in here and say they have tried to assassinate my president and I'm mad as hell, and like Equilux to come in and say, look, this may have gifted Donald Trump the presidency in November, but the war is being lost in Texas, it's turning blue, and this is what I wanted. But
well Brundlefly did tweet about this, and you know what he said?
Did he?
He said it feels
Go
fake.
ahead.
He said it feels fake. All right, so many people, they are so conspiratorial that they don't believe that this actually occurred. And I think that's just a sign that you've gone off the deep end.
Yes. So let's personalize it a bit. Where were you when you heard the news, Luke? Do you remember? What was it, about 4 o'clock your time?
It was about 3 o'clock, 3:11 my time, and I was at home.
Yeah. Do you think that this is one of those 9/11 stroke JFK type decade, decadal inflection moments, which are going to be, you're always going to remember where you were when you heard the news?
I'm not sure. Everyone's saying that, but I'm not sure. I wouldn't assert that. I would not assert that right now.
Interesting. Yeah, interesting. Because in a way, I know exactly where I was. It was like about 12 midnight here last night, and I ended up staying up till 4 a.m. watching it. And what was going through my mind, I'll be absolutely brutally honest, was excitement.
Yeah.
I was excited by it. I had an adrenaline rush. I mean, immediately I knew that he was safe. Everybody did within a minute because, he was back up on his feet. But it was exciting. And I had the feeling I'm in one of those moments that I've yet to experience in my life because I don't remember 9/11. And that I was like in the moment of living history. If you get me.
Yeah. And this is what makes you great as a commentator, and to whatever extent that I'm great as a commentator, it's the same thing. It is candor. We often put candor over courtesy. So the courteous, polite, prestigious reaction is not to talk about being excited or to talk about any feelings that you're having aside from feelings of sadness for the Republic. But that emphasis on courtesy and having the politically correct emotion robs commentary of honesty and candor and visceral truth. And so this is where live streaming is great. So in public commentary on the networks, you're not supposed to talk about people's physical characteristics, right? You're not supposed to talk about if someone's ugly or infirm or stunning or hot. You're not supposed to talk about these shameful emotions of being excited about these things. And this is where live streams are, I think, superior, because when you put so much emphasis on the politically correct emotional response, you lose so much in truth and candor that I think you're often giving up too much.
Yeah. So I also became aware that I was wanting to be involved in the story. Like, I immediately screenshotted like the Trump rally. I'd actually had the Trump rally paused in another tab because they tend to be quite boring, but I will occasionally tune in to like 5 or 10 minutes of them. And because it's getting close to the election and stuff, and Joe Biden's perhaps dropping out, I was interested in what is Trump actually saying. So I got it paused in another tab, and then I was doing something else. I was going to rewind it fast forward it later. And then I got like a notification on Telegram on one of the channels of what had happened. Watched the little video and then fast forwarded it. But so my initial instinct is like, I wanted to be involved in this story somehow. So I who avoids like tweeting, I tend to avoid tweeting about topics really that are not really anything to do with me anymore. I feel silly like sticking my beak into like political topics that aren't really involving me on Twitter. But even I got caught up in the moments. I screenshotted 2 images of Donald Trump and I uploaded them saying Donald Trump shot in the head, put it out there, and I realized I was getting caught up in the moment. There was like an element of narcissism about it. And I wanted it in some way to be about me too.
And again, that's human because we're all the center of the universe for ourselves.
Yeah.
And so that's a normal human and even somewhat healthy reaction in that you should be the center of your reality. Now, it's not politically correct to say this out loud, but what makes you compelling, and to whatever extent I'm compelling, is when we articulate these very common human emotions that are not given much vent in mainstream commentary.
Yeah. I mean, that's the only worth really of alternative media, isn't it? We come here, we're listening to you because we want somebody who we know is a real person to share the news with us. Why aren't we watching Megyn Kelly do it? We'd rather watch Megyn Kelly vicariously through you for some reason, because it's more personal. In a way, we've built up like a trust with you. And we do this with like a half a dozen or a dozen other people who we choose to follow on alternative media because we have like this personal relationship with them, and then we can have trust with them. And this is very different to just absorbing the news passively from like the TV screen.
Right, very because we do recognize, we do have a suspicion that physiognomy is real and that it means something. When I'm trying to understand complicated intellectual issues, I often Google the people whose thoughts I'm studying to get a look at them, because I feel like when I see photos of someone, I get a sense of their character. And this is not part of polite discussion, right? This is not part of elite discussion. This is not what you say even on Fox News. But I think it's reality. There is a visceral desire to see and to get a sense of what someone looks like, and you don't get that in the mainstream media. You note when someone looks incredibly frail or senile, such as Joe Biden, and that is not normally part of discussion in mainstream media. You note that one of the Secret Service agents protecting Donald Trump looked really good. I mean, particularly from the back. I mean, she looked great. She looked tight and fine. And you can admit that on a show like this, and you don't have to, right? There are times when you should hold back on an honest reaction. I mean, you shouldn't go on a show like this and talking about wanting to have relations with your stepmother. But there are areas of public life where honesty about one's visceral reactions is more important than obeying the laws of propriety.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's all I can offer, really. I mean, I can't offer some...
well, what I want to go on more with you on this topic. You know, when I looked up, I Googled Candor versus courtesy. And I Googled, when is it appropriate to comment on people's physical characteristics? Because when I was looking at the news media and their critiques of why the news media didn't talk about Joe Biden's obvious frailty and senility, one of the main points that the news media makes is that people in the news media feel highly uncomfortable commenting on personal characteristics. And I was just thinking about over the course of my life how often I've been reprimanded for publicly commenting on someone's physical characteristics. And I was just thinking, yeah, there are many good reasons not to comment publicly on people's personal characteristics. It can be painful and hurtful and gauche, but there's also a lot that's given up. And I'm thinking about someone who I was acquainted with who had great contempt for me. He despised me. His name was Greg Kreitzer. And one day he was getting out of his car and someone driving by yelled at him, "Get out of the way, fatso." And this was life-changing for him. He realized he needed to lose weight, and he lost like 60 pounds. And he ended up writing a best-selling book on fat due to someone making a rude remark. And I remember from my own life, at one point when I was 19, I was thinking of going to Sacramento State College. And my friend's father said to me, "Well, you know what they say about Sac State, don't you?" And I said, "No." He said, "Well, they say somebody has to go there." And I felt so burned by that comment that I resolved to go to a UC school and ended up going to UCLA, which is a prestigious public university, because of that cutting comment. And so we lose a great deal when we keep sacrificing candor and truth and honesty and visceral reactions for instead politically correct public utterances. Any further thoughts on this?
No, absolutely. But this is like a fundamental thing of the left, isn't it? That an innate characteristic. What would you call it? Is it a shibboleth? It's a shibboleth? Am I using that term correctly?
Yeah, I would call it a discipline. It's philosophically, it's the type of courtier discipline that developed when landowners and knights could no longer just live on their own plot of land and their own castle, but they had to move to court. And once you move from your own castle to court, you then have to take into account every person who may notice what you say and do. And so you have to mute your reactions. You cannot afford to be visceral anymore. You have to be very calculating in everything you say and do. So we've kind of now got a democratization of the courtier incentive system, because you and I now, if we're self-interested, we have to take into account how anyone could hear what we're saying, not just now, but in 20 years. Not just here, but in any context in which we move through life. A potential date, riding public transportation, going to a fast food restaurant, walking down the street. Anyone may hear what we said here and then react to us. And so we are trying to be candid, but we also have to have a great deal of discipline thinking about the effects of our words, not just now, not just on people we know, but on people we don't know in the future whose goodwill, or at least absence of hatred, we badly need.
Yeah. I mean, I actually was hyper aware of this because I kept my powder dry for a long time, just listening to shows, and then only elected to join in by making content myself whilst staying pseudonymous. So I was smartly able to keep that away. So obviously I was aware of this. I have to be careful. I don't want the crazy things I'm saying online to be attached to my real world identity. This could be dangerous for me. But yeah, that I'm reminded of when you're saying about people, you've got to be really careful about people's saying things about people's physical characteristics. But the left also deny this at the same time, or even the fact that you are withholding commenting on someone's physical characteristics, even that you are doing that has to be denied in a weird way. Because there's a TikTok going around of a guy interviewing different women and asking them the question, is Lizzo beautiful? And he does it with about half a dozen women, and they each answer, yes, of course she is. She's gorgeous. And then on the seventh lady, he says to her, "Did anybody tell you you look like Lizzo?" And she slaps him.
That's powerful because Lizzo is obviously highly obese and not attractive, and to say
But
that
no
she is
woman will
beautiful
admit
is
it.
insane.
But no woman will
Right,
answer
because
that she's obese or ugly.
Right, because they're much more conventional. Women much more tend to color between the lines because they've evolved to be much more careful in their public words.
Yeah, but the first woman who got compared to Lizzo was obviously immediately, viscerally disgusted and shocked. How dare you compare me to Lizzo? And that really does just exemplify everything that you've been saying. Yeah.
I mean, isn't this why we turn to dissident forms of discourse, because you do get a more visceral and honest and reactions that we can have more empathy with, rather than the stilted, highly polished, highly disciplined pronouncements that we get in the mainstream media.
Absolutely, yes, we do, and we occasionally want somebody to have like all their affrontages pulled down. We want to have their pants pulled down in front of everybody and exposed for like the charade that they're putting on to the world. In many ways, many of us still, I think I know, listen to people from the old blood sports era, and I'll listen to hours and hours and hours of boring, mind-numbing content that they now put out, just waiting in the hope for one of these moments where there'll be some kind of disagreement, an argument, there'll be an interview where somebody pulls the pants down of somebody else and exposes them to the world.
Yeah, I mean that's the attraction with comedy, right? Is that comedy, you probably get more real talk than any other form of entertainment, because what makes something funny is that real talk.
Yeah. I also heard, by the way, just going back to the earlier point about this being like one of those moments that you remember. Do you remember who you were dating or when you heard about 9/11?
Yes, I do.
So what
it was
I
a
heard
fling.
was
It was a
that
fling. Yeah, go ahead.
A fling. I heard that this is a perfect time, Luke, to go and ask a woman out for a date, for instance, because this is like and I'll work this one around it may be an explanation as to the answer to the question that you were asking. Why is the media holding back in really hammering home the significance of this event? Because it is such a moment of memory creation potential moment in people, a thought defining moment that the mainstream media, particularly the liberal left mainstream media, are hyper aware of. The New York Times are hyper aware of that. This moment is defining in people's minds so much that they have to be careful with it. And so I'd heard that this is a great time to go and ask a woman out on a date or whatever, because she's going to remember this moment for the rest of her life. What do you think about that?
Yeah, women love drama, right? Women love to be emotionally excited. So, for example, women tended to be really happy during at least the early stages of COVID, because one, health is one of those few areas of life where women are consistently more informed than men, and two, women love drama and emotional drama. And the early days of COVID provided tremendous emotional drama and tremendous opportunities for deploying their superior levels of learning with regard to health compared to men. So they got to run things and to feel dramatic.
Yeah. How did you feel watching those women there, Luke, the girl bosses, as I called them, surrounding Donald Trump? Does that fill you with confidence?
No, it doesn't. I mean, there was one of them helping him down the stairs, and imagine if his life depended on the ability of one agent to carry him some distance. I think it's insane to have women as law enforcement officers where strength is going to likely be a key part of their job, or as firefighters, right? Why would you want a 5'2", 110-pound woman going into a building to carry people who've passed out from smoke inhalation, carry them down 3 flights of stairs? So if you need physical strength for a job, I think it's insane to hire women. And there are other areas of life where I'm absolutely sure that on average, women are better than men. So it's not like I think, men are just the superior sex. I think men and women have different strengths, and you should be after hire accordingly. But because of ridiculous civil rights laws, you have to hire women for all sorts of jobs where men would be superior. And on the other hand, men don't tend to want to get into female-dominated professions like kindergarten teacher.
Yeah, I mean, from the scene that unfolded at the podium there, it's striking to me that the Secret Service agent that got under his right armpit was a woman.
Yeah, and an attractive one. I mean, I'd date her.
And this must have been, yeah, nice ponytail too.
But I wouldn't want my life depending on her.
No, and what struck me was this moment must have been rehearsed. They must have training. Probably, I know. How often does the Secret Service train to get someone out of the kill box? Surely this is like the number one training that they do, I know, once a month or once a week or whatever. And I imagine that the training would be that the guy that you've got to protect has been incapacitated. I mean, Trump is 78 years old. If that bullet had just got anywhere closer, he would have been immobile in the kill box. And this must have been trained for hundreds of times with a group of Secret Service agents to get that man out of the kill box. And the woman, I appreciate he was okay and he got to his feet by himself, and so it wasn't that immobile body that had to be, removed from the zone. But the woman, it was a woman who took the support. You didn't know if he was going to collapse on the way down those stairs,
right?
Just from the shock,
right?
It was a woman who was holding him under the left arm, and it's sheer. It's everything screams incompetence. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll give examples from my own life where women were superior. So I've often been interviewed by various TV crews, and when it's a female interviewing me, I usually give a better performance, right? I want to do a better job when I'm talking to a woman, an attractive woman, than a man. Also, until recently, I had a great deal of trouble with fatigue. And I remember I was working with the National Film Board of Canada, and I was absolutely exhausted. I had to help them carry equipment, and I was just wiped out. And a female assistant on their crew just took time to talk to me, and it just filled me up. Like, it was just kind of caring, nurturing female talk, and it just filled me up, and it gave me the strength to carry on for the rest of the day. So there are certainly many areas of life where women are superior, where women will give you strength, right? Emotional strength to carry on compared to men. I'm sure there are many times when you're doing an investigation where women will have more success getting information than if you'd sent a man out, right? People who book guests on cable TV shows, they're overwhelmingly women because they just do the job in a much more compelling fashion. All right, Mike, you've joined the chat. Mike, any commentary on what you've seen and heard today?
Hey, well, I just wanted to mention it was funny you're talking about when women are superior in jobs. Some years ago, Jane Goodall, the chick who hung out with the apes, apparently Leakey was the guy who hired her, and I guess would have been in the 70s or the 60s, maybe even. He literally put out "Women Want It."
Yeah.
that he didn't want to, he felt women were more nurturing, obviously dealing with babies and children. They're more patient and whatnot. That his literal job notice was women want it. He didn't want a man to try to study the chimps for years. That he felt a woman would be more suited to the job.
Right. If I'd just been shot and an attractive female Secret Service agent put her arms around me, I would be thinking, does this mean I got a chance to nail her? So that's
Right.
why I would not want attractive Secret Service agents or police officers or assistants around me, because one of the primary things I'm going to be thinking about is, will I get to nail her? And that's not really something that I want to be thinking about when I've got a job to do. It would just be an unwanted distraction.
Yeah, it was kind of funny. Yesterday, while we were watching it, I'm at my brother's house, and I don't know. For some reason, I was focused on that woman with her little bun.
Yeah.
And she had the hat, and she had the arm up, and she had her sunglasses on. And then I'm like, why are her sunglasses off? And they're back on. Like, I was just there was the one tall guy who had his one arm up, was doing a good job of blocking his head from the next bullet, I guess. But that chick in front was, she was pretty hot, and somehow I was just focused on what is she doing?
Yeah, I would just take her in my arms and collapse on her bosom. That's what I'd do if I just got shot. Stephen James, you're a man of great discipline. You just get shot. A hot Secret Service agent wraps her arms around you. What would you be thinking about?
Yeah, what I wanted to know was, how does that bulletproof vest go on over the bosom? This is what I was trying to get a look at.
Yeah.
I was trying to figure this out. Do they have cups built into it? Could this be more useful for deflecting the bullets?
Cersei's breastplate in Game of Thrones. She had the built in.
This is what I was thinking.
There's a new Blue Angels documentary, which is great. And there are so many hot, in great shape women on this team. And so they work very closely together. And when they're working 16 hours a day. And it would drive me mad working 16 hours a day with women I'm dying to nail. It would just be much better for my performance if I was working 16 hours a day with men, because I have no interest in having sex with men. I just can't imagine working in an intense setting with attractive women. It would significantly reduce my job performance.
Absolutely.
I guess some guys can do it. A lot of these guys were married, so wow.
No, I don't think a lot of guys can do it, Luke. I think it's a big problem. I think this is part of the problem of the workforce. It's well known. John Peterson said something about this. Why do women wear makeup
to work if they're not interested in people looking at them in a sexual fashion? Yeah. When I meet a woman, the first thing I think about is whether or not I want to nail her. And then that's not the only thing I think about. I am able to be friends with women. I've had women who are Shakespeare scholars who I'm friends with, and I have friendly terms with a lot of professional women who I treat with respect. And this is no longer disabling for me. I am able to work around women 8 hours a day, women who I want to nail, and I don't say anything about it. I don't behave inappropriately. I'm able to do my job, but it's a bit of a distraction. And also I'm not in a quote unquote superior position to them. If it would be a little more challenging for me if they were my assistants, right, rather than my peers. But even then, I could still do it. It's just a challenge because I am a man who has a visceral attraction to beautiful young women.
Yeah, that's been addressed many times. There's actually the Seinfeld episode where George hires a secretary, and the one chick comes in and she's smoking hot, and he's like, "Sorry, I can't hire you. I'm looking at you, I can't even remember my own name." Yeah. And then he ends up having sex with the efficient one that he ends up hiring. But I think it was Nietzsche said something about men cannot be friends with attractive women.
Yeah, and that's
the women don't even have to be attractive.
Yeah.
Let's be clear. We don't
Yeah.
even have to be able to see their face
Yeah.
online, in online groups. If a woman comes into an online male space, it
Yeah.
can be incredibly disruptive, and we never have to see her face. I've experienced this. One of the guys in a group can just like go crazy and start, really believing that he has a chance with her, and really like start white knighting and all this kind of stuff. The dynamic changes instantly when there is a woman amongst men. It's like a proverbial cat amongst the pigeons in every single case.
That's one thing I love about both Orthodox Judaism and Australian culture. So Australia has the most separation between men and women of any first world nation, I believe. And also in Orthodox Judaism, there are considerable separations between men and women. There are very much male spaces and female spaces. And I just find that so much easier. I mean, and without exceptional circumstances, I just primarily want to be around guys.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah, it's just so much easier and more.
That's a product of maturing, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
In your youth, you wanted to be around girls.
Yeah.
You know, if the very opposite, even though you knew it was bad for you, even though you knew this, this nothing productive was gonna come of this. You'd choose the female company over like if you could pick, you'd pick the office with 3 hot girls in it rather than the office with 4 dudes in it.
Yeah. Claire Core, anything you've heard that you want to comment on?
Yes, I do, about sex segregation. I really think that today, yesterday, should be the inflection point of feminism. The commentary you made about the incompetency and the mediocrity of women, and the fact that they also make men stupid and say things they don't mean is really a very urgent political problem. And the thing is, they always have that excuse. You know, in the end, however much you blame them, the answer will be, well, you shouldn't have given us all that power then, should you?
Yeah, and it's just visceral. Women don't understand, because women do have, sexual temptations. It's just not nearly as strong as it is for men, because how often do famous, powerful women throw everything away for sex with, some attractive guy? It almost never happens. Like, it happens 100 times for powerful men who ruin their lives for some meaningless sexual encounter when compared to women.
Yes, I mean, it is part of feminine privilege to always have more offers of sex than you are prepared to accept. And that is basically the essence of feminine privilege that I think a lot of men are, hoping to acquire by changing their sex and having their gender-affirming surgery. I think that's why they do it, and then they go and, I don't know, star in porn videos or something. I mean, I can't imagine why men would want to do that, want to become women, other than to, think, well, all I have to do is look the part, and offers of sex will come my way.
Stephen James, you're just back from a trip to the United States. What surprised you? What did you notice from your time in America?
The principal takeaway that I got from coming to America, ask somebody else a question, Luke. I've just lost my earphones. 1 second.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
1 moment.
Mike, anything else you want to comment on? One thing that grabs my attention. Go ahead, Mike.
Well, I think Claire was talking about, I think gender dysphoria is a real condition, a psychological condition that probably can't be explained to those who do not have it. There's even, I don't know if any of you guys have heard of body identity integrity disorder. There's actually a movie called Whole, WHOLE, about people who want to be amputees, and they literally, one guy like blew his own leg off with a double-barreled shotgun. So I don't think putting psychological disorders up as some sort of norm or why would these people do this? Why does Bruce Jenner want to be a woman? I don't know. It's something's wrong in his brain, obviously, but these things happen.
And another thing I notice among many women is that they love to become helpless if they think that's an effective strategy for landing a man and securing a man. So they'll get married or they'll get into a relationship, and then all sorts of things that they were perfectly capable of doing, they now say, oh, I can no longer drive, I can no longer do this or that, and the helplessness attracts some men. Stephen, Stephen James, you just went to America. What grabbed your attention?
Yeah, thanks, Luke. Sorry about that. I'd just like to rant about Bluetooth for a second. I hate Bluetooth. Why do we still have these problems with Bluetooth? Sorry about that. The first thing, or the main takeaway that I got from America was it's not, or at least where I went, it's not as woke as I was led to believe. Now, I was in Las Vegas, and I gather that this is like a Disneyland in the middle of the desert. And then I visited various places within like a 500-mile radius of Las Vegas, so rural areas, kind of in the west out there. But I was shocked. Certainly in Las Vegas, there was no LGBT stuff. Of course, it was multi-ethnic in an incredible way, but it's a tourist hotspot. But just in terms of wokery, there was none. I saw no LGBT nonsense. Objective beauty is still celebrated out there. Beautiful women are on display. They are used to sell products. There's no doubt about that. They're on billboards. So I saw no like LGBT flags or anything like this. I was shocked by that. Your country, if this is anything to go by, is way, way, way less woke than the United Kingdom. We are far, far more gone.
But Stephen, didn't you mention those celluloid Las Vegas showgirls who were a bit chubby, that sort of thing?
Yeah, but this wasn't a systemic thing. I said on the Las Vegas Strip, I was disappointed by some of the showgirls who were walking around, the entrepreneurs with feathers in their hair who offer you a photograph with them for like $40, that some of them were like chubby, had a cellulite ass, God forbid, pardon me, and they were of various different. They weren't all the typical beautiful white showgirls who you expect. But that's not a systemic thing. That's just the nature of the entrepreneur on the street.
So did you notice that Americans are fatter than people in England? I mean, that was one of the first things I noticed when I moved to America in 1977, but it's no longer true, at least compared to Australia. Now, Australians are every bit as obese as Americans. What about the English and Americans? Are they equally fat, or is one group more obese?
No, it didn't stand out. It didn't stand out, you're correct. If it did, it was that I saw like somebody who was really huge. I occasionally encountered a really huge person having to ride one of those mobility scooters, and I thought, wow, that is a rare sight, and I've seen it within a couple of weeks. So I think you might have more people right on the far end of like the bell curve of obesity, and so it stands out and we point it out more. But that's all.
I have to mention Thurrock Lakeside, which is a shopping mall in Essex, where I think the Cockneys who became affluent and moved to would live. And this was years ago, but I just have this memory of kind of the impression of elephants, going up and down the shopping mall. But this is different to shopping malls in other parts of England. This is just a memory of mine, and it is quite an old one. But I think part of the affluence is the ability to eat yourself fat, and not be able to afford to go to the gym and pay your gym membership. I think there's some economic categorizing there.
Right.
I
Well,
imagine
in
it's real.
America, it's ironic. I think they claim being poor makes you fatter. Obviously you look at people and you're like, well, they haven't missed a meal. But I guess the argument from the liberals is they eat highly processed food that is cheaper and therefore is worse for you and makes you fatter. As a fat man myself, I don't eat that greatly, but I've been working out. I dropped 40 pounds this last year, but
congratulations.
It is interesting. Luke, you said you moved to America in the 70s. As I remember, everybody was skinny in the 70s. In fact, maybe a month ago, I was scrolling through the channels and Meatballs, or Meatball, whatever, the Bill Murray movie was on, where they're at, like a summer camp, and the scene where they're by the lake and all the kids are running around and everyone is like super skinny. Like, I call it 70s skinny, like before processed food, I guess, before the 80s, obviously fast food became a big thing. But if you looked at the American population, if you look at like old high school yearbooks and stuff, I remember as a kid, when we had 40 people in our class, there was like one fat kid.
Right. Okay. I got the point. Sorry, it's a good point, but I do want to shift back to something I was talking about 30 minutes ago, that there is a struggle and there are competing values between candor and courtesy. And often people saying something that is discourteous but candid to you has the power to transform your life for the good. For example, we may not always be doing fat women a favor when we tell them how fabulous they look. And I think as a society, we have gone too far to the value of courtesy over candor. And I think in large part is because we've become more diverse, less trusting. Life is therefore less safe. There are now many more things that can totally screw up your life. And so when life is more insecure, we become more cautious. And so we are less willing to be candid with each other. And Joe Biden's obvious senility, for example, would be something where America would have been better served if news commentators and news reporters placed more value on candor than on courtesy, and did what apparently was very uncomfortable for many people, commenting on his personal characteristics, such as the very awkward, slow way that he moved and his frequent brain freezes and his overall awkwardness and sense of senility. So I think we need to move in a more visceral and truth direction in our public comments, and this has to be done with wisdom, right? You don't want to be gratuitously saying things that are true but needlessly hurtful. But when it comes to anyone in public office, right, you should not be held back by fear of commenting on personal characteristics if those personal characteristics are very likely reflections of their ability to do their job. And so if someone is hobbling through life, and the hobbling is just getting worse, as it has been for Joe Biden, if their brain is freezing, if they're showing many symptoms of senility, I think everyone would have been better off if this had been called out more 4 years ago. But this will come at a cost. This will mean that there will be some comments that will be hugely discourteous and inappropriate and shocking and painful for some people. But Stephen, I'd like to see a direction where mainstream commentary becomes a little bit more like live streaming, meaning paying more attention to personal characteristics that we all take notice of and which reflect on the ability of people to perform in their jobs. Stephen, any thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. But then, Luke, you and I would have no USP, would we? There'd be no unique selling point of this format. Hey, I had a thought. Right, speaking of Joe Biden and his the covering up of his oncoming dementia, his senility, there's something else that has also been covered up during this presidency and is covered up, and that is Kamala Harris's innate stupidity, I think. Don't you think that in a weird way that is also and currently being covered up, and the Democrats might be in a situation where they are throwing they've decided they've got to throw Joe Biden under the bus, but then will immediately, if it ends up being Kamala Harris that they put on the ticket, go into a similar mode of completely defending and covering up how unfit for the job she is too.
Yeah, I mean, she got her start in politics as Willie Brown's mistress. Willie Brown was a big deal, California politics, but she started out as his girlfriend, and he appointed her to her first political positions. So she served him in a variety of positions, and then he served her by securing her a variety of positions. Mike, any thoughts on shifting public conversation towards more candor and a little less courtesy?
Yeah, I think political correctness is obviously run amok. Talking about fat people and whatnot. I think there was a news presenter woman who was rather large, and somebody had commented, you should lose some weight or something. And there was this huge blowback against them. Like, how dare you fat shame people,
Yeah.
Well, back in the day, fat shaming caused people to lose weight. This acceptance of obviously unhealthy fatness is a bad thing for society. In fact, there was, I guess, some social influencer. She was like, 400 or 500 pounds or something. That was her thing. She's one of these 600-pound life people or whatever, and she actually lost like 300 pounds and was proud of it. And she got blowback for being proud of losing weight. That now you're fat shaming fat people because you're celebrating losing some weight and stuff. It's quite insane. But like Steve was saying, America is not quite as woke as much of the world views us. I would assume Vegas is probably one of our skinnier cities. If you went to Birmingham, Alabama, or New Orleans, you probably would have seen different body types than what you see in Vegas. But everybody's not LA and San Francisco and New York. But anyway,
Claire, any thoughts on shifting the tone of public conversation with regard to public officials a little bit more in the direction of candor, with a little less courtesy and a little less deference with regard to their personal characteristics that bear on their ability to do their jobs?
Absolutely. I think we should focus on making the point that it is often better to be cruel, to be kind, when it is to inform somebody who needs to be informed about, some important aspect of their life or what they're trying to achieve. Because, fundamentally, we need truth to make rational and moral decisions. If we're not told, if we don't know some important, piece of information, then we're going to get it wrong, and we're going to hurt ourselves or cause great injustice. So I think we should go back to the time of, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me if I am a man. And if women are going to, get all hurt and traumatized and being told that they're not so pretty because they're a bit chubby, then maybe they should go right out of public life and back into the kitchen.
Right. We should stop praising as beautiful, women who are in public, right? Women who are choosing to be public figures like Lizzo. We should stop praising them as beautiful when they're morbidly obese. I don't think that's a good idea. And so, yeah, a more robust discussion, I think, that's just more real. So on this question of, is physiognomy destiny? So if we said 10 out of 10, yes, physiognomy is destiny, I'd guess my own thought would be 5 out of 10. That I do think that someone's physical characteristics does have a profound influence on people and on their direction in life. For example, beautiful people tend to see the world very differently than the resentful woke crowd, right? I don't know many happy feminists, right? Feminists universally tend to be sour, bitter, unpleasant people. The leading wokesters don't tend to be happy people. So I'd say physiognomy is destiny. I'd say 5 out of 10, that there's a significant correlation, but the bold statement physiognomy is destiny, I think, of course, is a dramatic overstatement. It's attention-getting. Stephen, James, how do you relate to the statement physiognomy is destiny?
Oh, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, look, it's like 9 out of 10, or you should consider it to be 10 out of 10 until proven otherwise. Now, I know that's a bold statement to make, and you can say, of course, it's not that. Of course, there's some great people who will surprise you. But one of the first and most useful red pills when you break the woke paradigm, and you reformulate your thoughts on our side of the political aisle. One of the first red pills, I think, is to kind of realize the physical differences between us all can be good signifiers, can be good warning signs of danger, of potential inappropriateness, of potential pitfalls in the road, of potential clashes of culture coming up ahead in relationships. And so there are many instances where people who have not been red-pilled to this paradigm end up suffering greatly for it. The ones who pay the toll because they weren't aware of what they were getting into. And so I think it is extremely useful to, until proven otherwise, just for your own self-serving course through life, to say, look, it's 10 out of 10 until I'm going to be proven otherwise. And you might miss out on a few interactions with people because you thought, I'm going to steer clear of this person because they don't fit my ideal view of the ideal physiognomy stroke character, but you'll save yourself a lot of hurt in the long run.
Yeah, and enough people with physical disfigurements commit such a disproportionate amount of violent crime, it is worth taking into consideration. Mike, what's your reaction to the statement physiognomy is destiny?
I've got to run, by the way, so
okay,
thanks for having me.
Yep, cheers, mate.
Thanks, bye.
Yeah. Mike, so physiognomy, for people who don't know, it means somebody's appearance. Mike, I can't hear you. So physiognomy is destiny. You're muted, so you have to unmute. Go ahead, Mike.
Sorry. When you were talking about it, it reminded me of it's probably 10 years ago. A friend of mine, his neighbor had a party on Saturday, and his neighbor worked at a oil change place or something, was blue collar guy, and we went to the party, and everybody was kind of little overweight, kind of Walmart people, if you will, and blue collar people. And then the next day, a friend of mine had a birthday party for her boyfriend at the beach, and we went, and everybody was like pretty much college educated. There was like a couple lawyers, a doctor or two, and it was my buddy mentioned, do you think rich people are better looking because they're rich, or are they rich because they're better looking? So at the second party, there were no overweight people other than myself and one guy. And at the first party, everybody was overweight and fat and ugly, more or less. So what is the cause and effect? Is it, if you're better looking, again, Seinfeld, I think Jerry one time said, you don't see any good looking homeless people. So I'm not sure where the cause and the effect is, but generally wealthier people look better than poor people.
Yeah.
Obviously with women, you have makeup and beauty and how much money they spend. If you remember the movie Tootsie, where Dennis Hoffman becomes a woman, and he's like, I don't know how women pay for all this stuff, all this makeup and whatnot.
Claire, what do you think of the statement, physiognomy is destiny?
I'm gazing at the face of Ted Bundy, and I think he's actually quite a good-looking guy. And I think a few serial killers have been actually, like the boy next door. So I'm saying it's very shallow to judge a book by its cover, and there are more effective ways of judging a person, which is to listen out for what they say, and whether they are liars, whether they talk nonsense, whether they will correct themselves when confronted with facts and sound arguments. And if they won't change their minds, and then you can form some kind of judgment over them. I think it is unfair to say that a man is, who is ugly is always telling a lie, while a woman that he is alleged to have made cry is telling the truth. And I think this is something that the battle between the sexes is it's something that men should be mindful of, because I think a lot of men are instantly condemned because they're old and ugly and kind of labeled with being pedo, while a crying young woman is automatically given the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah. And Claire, when Democrats declared Donald Trump a threat to democracy, the equivalent of Adolf Hitler, and if people vote for Trump, it will be the last election in the United States, are they setting the ground for events like this assassination attempt?
Yes, I was just shocked at how casually, the media, that there was this famous comedian who showed a bloodied head of Trump. And I noticed on Twitter Spaces that Richard Spencer was echoing the sentiment as a Democrat. And obviously, it was deliberate. They were creating an atmosphere where, somebody might just be crazy enough to take the law into their own hands, and save the security services from having to do it themselves, I guess. Yes, it is sinister, it is frightening, but then there it is. The media has the power to say that black is white and vice versa. And they should be scrutinized much more carefully. And because, you made the point so well today about, exposing feminine incompetence.
The Democratic Party can't organize.
I think this should be the inflection point when the beginning of the end of the matriarchy begins. When that picture of Trump being, being helped by this woman in a ponytail who was very short, I think kind of makes a point quite well. I hope more people will notice.
Thanks. And Mike, what do you think about the idea that by comparing Donald Trump to Hitler and saying that people vote for Donald Trump, that this will be the last election in the United States? Did this kind of rhetoric set the stage for things like yesterday's assassination attempt?
Yeah, there's obviously an interesting double standard to creating an atmosphere. When right-wingers say something, when Trump said, the Mexicans are sending rapists and murderers, some of them might be good people, blah, blah, blah. There was a huge backlash that, he's calling all Mexicans murderers and rapists. But when the left, pretty much calls him a Nazi and then he gets shot at, it's like, well, we didn't mean for anyone to shoot him. So I think there is something to this idea of creating an atmosphere of hate and whatnot. I'm a free speech guy. I think the heckler's veto is a bad thing when, people turn violent to keep you from saying something. But there's a balance in there of what is good speech and what is bad speech. I don't think we can outlaw any of it. It's like beauty. It's in the eye of the beholder. But the left seems to want to have its cake and eat it too.
Okay, Mike, I'm going to let you go. Did you have any final words?
No, I'm good. Thank you. Thanks for your time.
Thanks for stopping by. And Claire, I'm going to let you go. Do you have any final words?
Just one sentence. The left is feminine, and this must be remembered. And it is irrational and hysterical.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me, Luke.
Yes, thanks, Claire. Okay, I want to play a little bit of Mark Halperin. This is from Thursday morning. New push to dump
Now, that's
Joe
different
Biden.
than saying they are going to urge him to not run. That's different from saying they think he's convinced he can't go forward. But there are some people now saying that he is going to be told he can't win, and they believe he will reach the conclusion that he can't go forward. And there are even people saying that's going to happen very soon. Now, I don't think that's true based on what conversations I've had. And again, Joe Biden woke up this morning, and by 8:30, he had an ABC poll, a Washington Post poll showing him even with Donald Trump. And by 8:30, he had the best inflation report he'd gotten since he became president. So it's difficult to understand why so much is happening right now. Press conference at 6:30, scheduled to go to Michigan tomorrow, scheduled to do a Lester Holt interview on Monday. Other interviews are said to be in the works. But I will tell you that there are serious people now around Joe Biden and connected to congressional leadership whose attitude today is very similar to the attitude of 5 news cycles ago, which is this is untenable. And that includes, again, senior people in his campaign. No one has said to me that anyone has made the case to the president. No one has said to me that anyone's going to, although there are indications that there are congressional leaders who might. The president is most of what the body language is. They think he'll do fine in the press conference. Of course, we'll watch and see that together in just a little bit. The meeting with the senators and the senior campaign staff, by every account I've been given, including from 2 senators who were in the meeting, did not go well. The reality is that the skeptics on Capitol Hill and in the donor class are not interested in private polling that suggests a narrow path to an electoral college victory. What senators are saying is they can't explain or defend the president's mental state, and they can't explain their previous failure to bring this up as an issue either publicly or privately, and that they consider that to be an untenable position for 120 days of a campaign. I have swung wildly during the course of the last 2 weeks about whether I think he would be the nominee or not. I have thought mostly that he would be, because he will be the nominee unless he decides not to be. They're his delegates. But I would say right now, those of you, including some of you I see right now, who have told me for quite some time that he could not survive this, it's certainly trending that way. The other trend that has switched a little bit, that was largely trending towards, if not Biden, open convention. Things have trended a little bit back towards the vice president. I still don't know anyone who thinks that Joe Biden thinks that Kamala Harris could beat Donald Trump, but that doesn't mean if he got out, he wouldn't endorse her. And what I've spent a fair amount of time today, as the congressional sources and the Biden campaign sources have started to go back to saying that they didn't think he would be the nominee, I spent a fair amount of time trying to figure out who would actually run. And I think there's about a dozen names that have been put out there of people who would run. There's 2 kinds of.
Well, right now, after this unsuccessful assassination attempt on Donald Trump, I think fewer Democrats are going to want to oppose him in the fall. So Trump's odds of winning the presidential election have jumped dramatically since this unsuccessful assassination attempt. So this is Mark Halperin on Thursday morning.
Of running, if this is open, and open could mean with Kamala Harris in it or not. One kind of running is you're the chosen candidate of Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, that you're an anointed ticket that's considered the establishment choice. That may not work, but the delegates, remember, are all Biden-Harris delegates, and they would pick the nominee. So one is, if that group, or if Nancy Pelosi, maybe Jim Clyburn, if that group decides we're for a ticket, or maybe just we're for a presidential candidate and they can pick their running mate, that's one kind of running. That kind of running comes with a great earned media. It comes with presumably a persuasive argument with the delegates who are Biden-Harris delegates. Presumably it comes with the ability to raise money from their financial circles, maybe help from their veteran campaign advisors. The other kind of running is there isn't that kind of laying on hands, maybe by some of those people, but not in a way that creates a clear favorite. And then the question is, who wants to get in that race? And getting in that race with Kamala Harris in it is different than getting in it without her in it. I think there's a big assumption that these people would all get in, and it would be a challenge to figure out who is allowed to address the convention, who's on a ballot if there is a ballot. I'm not so sure based on the calls I've had today. I think the reality is, and this is something that concerns a lot of senior people in the party, it's easy to say, oh, Gretchen Whitmer. It's easy to say Josh Shapiro. These people have done nothing like run for president. And there's a concern about their ability to handle the scrutiny. And most people in Trump world think it's hilarious that these people think that they can survive the scrutiny that would come. There's no one on the list who strikes fear in the hearts of Mar-a-Lago, which is not to say they take it for granted. But the capacity to launch a campaign and not have your family destroyed is something on the minds of some of the people mentioned all the time. You could say that Gavin Newsom is the obvious choice if what you're looking for is someone who's been at the highest levels. Because if you say Beshear, Cooper, Whitmer, Wes Moore, these people have not played at anything like this level. They've gotten no scrutiny. So you say, well, Gavin Newsom, governor of California, on national media all the time, major league skills. But then I'd urge you, if you think that, to go watch his debate with Ron DeSantis, where he was not that great, in my view. He certainly didn't blow him away. And so the reality is, you can play fantasy football and mix and match any two people. And of course, the one that people mix and match the most is Shapiro and Whitmer, because those two states are so critical. But it's having covered a lot of presidential campaigns and observing those people and meeting some of them and knowing some of them, I couldn't tell you that any of them would be stronger than Joe Biden, which is, of course, a lot of what Joe Biden thinks as well. So if Joe Biden withdraws, we'll have to see what Harris does. We'll have to see what these other Democratic leads do. To go back to the first question, we've seen very clear indications, publicly and privately. Pelosi very publicly, Schumer and Jeffries more privately, but clearly in the last 24 hours, all of them have made clear they're not just going to sit back and let Donald Trump run against Joe Biden. His task of proving to people that he should be the nominee who are skeptical is very difficult, because at this point, most of them, from what they say, they can't be satisfied. They don't care how many interviews or town halls he does, although they're skeptically do them. They want medical records and they want sustained performance. And that's not happening. So I understand that there'll be no more medical transparency. There'll be no more wide open events. Now we'll see that at the press conference. Last two things I'll say, and then I want to bring in a couple folks. It's still his nomination. And as of this morning, my understanding was he was not thinking about modalities of giving it up. But as people in my life, Democrats and Republicans who told me for 10 days he's going to not be the nominee, have said, it's all gradual until it's sudden. So I'm not telling you he's going to get out at the press conference, but I could also tell you, based on the conversations I've had since about noon, it wouldn't surprise me at this point. I don't think he will, but it wouldn't surprise me. And then finally, I believe, based on the best information I have, that there's a good chance that J.D. Vance will be named Trump's running mate on Sunday. There's some Democrats, I don't know why they're saying this, but some Democrats saying that that Biden will get out on Sunday. So if you thought you were going to have a relaxing Sunday, maybe not. Maybe one of the biggest news days we've had.
Okay. Comment on Twitter. Woman says, I'm not going to lie. This is a weird reaction. Why would you open yourself up to more potential harm after thinking you're almost assassinated and then yell, fight, fight, fight? And Inez responds, couldn't come up with a better example of the feminized society than the inability to understand what drives a manly reaction of defiance like that of Donald Trump's. Right. You're hearing from the first classmate of Thomas Crooks. His Bethel Park classmate describes the would-be former president assassin. He's described as a loner who was bullied relentlessly and wore hunting outfits in class. Okay. Right. Let's play a little bit more here from Mark Halperin.
Having personally lived through something like this is what I will say. Nobody has any idea what's going on behind the scenes. This is all pure speculation. And I think we have seen some leaks from the highest levels, but very few, right? Most of the leaks that we're seeing are coming out of mid-level staff people. It's not coming out of Ron Klain. It's not coming out of Steve Ricchetti. And unless it's coming out of Jill or Joe Biden or their kids or the people who are in the room, everything we're hearing, we should just chalk up to a lot of it's bullshit. And I say this as someone who, in the final days of the Cuomo administration, there were a lot of things that were being written about how we were making decisions, things I was advising the governor to do. How
organize this very complicated thing on pretty short notice. Jill Abramson, unmute, please.
Jill Abramson's former editor of the New York Times.
We have talked about, I think a lot of us feel this is a dangerous situation for the country because the president is not fit to carry out his duties, the responsibilities of the office. And I'm so disgusted with the press. I mean, most of you know I've been speaking out on that in various places, but watching the news conference, yeah, it was ugly, was difficult, but the press should in one voice demand, okay, Biden's going to say no, but make a clear demand for transparency about his health records. And they should be demanding to interview his doctor. And they should not stop asking for that. And it's unbelievable to me that there isn't a strong cry. We are the watchdogs for the public. Like, where the F are we? The most important, we're dealing on this call. Look, this is a great call. I love doing it. But we're dealing in the realm of politics and conjecture. I'm sorry, my business is finding out the facts. And I want his health records. I want his doctor to be held accountable. I want Joe Biden to have to submit to an interview with a reputable medical journalist. Stat News has a team of them, including Larry Altman, who, served for, at the Times for so many years as the watchdog for the public on the health of the presidential candidates. This is just an abdication of our jobs. And the fact that the White House press corps didn't just walk out of that press conference amazes me and disgusts me.
Yeah. Jill, I couldn't agree with you more. But all I'll say is, I've written about this. Joe Biden was showing signs of this in 2017. I watched a 20-minute video today.
I'm with you.
Of clips from Joe Biden in the 2020 campaign, most of which he appears more out of it than he did on the stage in Atlanta. And I am appalled, and have been since 2017 or 2019, that the President of the United States addresses a dead Congresswoman, and there's a few questions at the briefing. This was a national security emergency.
I agree.
And the amount of scrutiny of Donald Trump compared to the amount of scrutiny of the incumbent is, I've said this a few times lately, I think it's a more serious failure than WMD. It's a more serious failure than Russia. It may be the most serious failure.
I'm your ally in this.
And it is a joke to watch the briefing this week, to watch these reporters suddenly concerned about this. We're going to do a whole two-way about this. We might do a month's worth. But I couldn't agree with you more, Joe. And all I'd say is, this is not a new problem. This is an old problem. And the White House intimidated and threatened reporters more than the Trump administration ever did. And it is an outrage how little that was written about and how intimidated they were. And I would talk to White House reporters, and they would say, oh, yeah, the president's completely out of it. Nothing. Thank you, Jill. Jim Kennedy, who's worked for Democratic presidents.
Okay, so the police sniper who apparently killed the would-be assassin, had the assassin in his sights for many seconds prior to taking him out. Right, the police sniper had the would-be assassin in his sights considerably before the would-be assassin opened fire. So why the hell did the police sniper not do his job prior to the would-be assassin getting off 8 shots? Right, here's a thoughtful perspective on Twitter. Right, we've all seen the photo by now of the sniper taking his view off of the scope and hesitating. I would have done the same thing in that situation. I'll explain. Think about it. You're not in Syria. You are on sniper duty at a political rally in the US. Usually don't have threats. Whatever threats you do have are usually an unruly Bernie bro. The venue security can just throw out, and Secret Service doesn't even need to get involved. Then you see something that looks like a gun. Better get this right. We all remember what happened at Derek Chauvin. Sticks head up, looks to confirm. Imagine shooting an unarmed civilian because you thought you saw a gun. Imagine the news stories the next day. You've heard of fight or flight. There's a third option, freeze. You're not in Syria or Iraq. It's not that kind of rules of engagements. What do? You better get this right. Then the shots confirm what you saw and you return fire. So all this thought process happens in about 3 seconds. So if you watch the clip, it's easy to pick about that clip now, but at the time, nobody was watching. They were listening to Trump's speech. That was it. So one perspective why the sniper hesitated and allowed the would-be assassin to get off 8 shots before he was apparently finally taken out. And remember, the military had a sniper with a view of bin Laden, and the U.S. military gave the sniper a stand-down order in Afghanistan. Okay, this is from last night, Megyn Kelly talking to Rich Lowry.
You trust them, right? The reason, when this was a big scandal that Trump supposedly wanted people to bring weapons in proximity to the Capitol, someone was telling me, he always joked with the Secret Service about, these are my people, just let them in, it'll be fine. But anyone who's out there in any crowd like that, no matter how much Secret Service protection is, you are ultimately putting your body on the line. And we saw dramatic evidence of that this afternoon.
And Rich, here is the report that I got from, he is the father of my friend. His name is Larry Wood. And he said that there were tens of thousands there by his estimation, that he heard a single gunshot. He and his wife were seated farther back, then another, then a pause, and then the rapid fire, that there were state police everywhere. And I asked him about the security, and he said it was tight and that they were forced to go through a magnetometer. And even they, as an older couple, were not allowed to bring in, his wife had a long umbrella and she couldn't bring it in. Right. So they understand it always amps up when the former president is there, and it amps up even more as he inches closer and closer to becoming the nominee again. So they wouldn't let her in with the long umbrella. So they had to be seated farther back. And then they saw what we saw, which was he appeared to get hit from on the right side from a shooter who was off to the right. And then the crowd went nuts. I mean, people started to realize, he started to realize, he said first he thought it was maybe fireworks. He wasn't sure.
Hey, Jeremy Carl has an important tweet. A lot of people think there's a conspiracy, unhinged Democratic rhetoric about Trump created an environment for this to happen, but absent compelling evidence, the far more likely and more scary likelihood is this is just incompetence like we see in the rest of government that let the shooter get so close to the president. Our government is too stupid to perform its basic tasks anymore because we don't reward performance and success and we don't punish failure. And that is more scary for the future of America than any conspiracy theory.
Sure. And then they realized it was gunshots and that they needed to get out of there. And you think about, it's not just Donald Trump. It's not just this poor Trump supporter who appears to have been murdered today. Forget the shooter. It is the old. It is men and women who are just out there to support their country, their preferred candidate, to show their love of the Stars and Stripes days after July 4th and what they think it stands for by potentially voting for this man. And they get scared to within an inch of their lives running for their safety.
So what do we know about the motives of this shooter?
The RNC chair, SOT 11 guys, he joined Shannon on Fox News Sunday earlier, and he talked about the messaging that needs to happen after this. Listen.
There is no place in politics in any way, shape, or form for this kind of violence, for these types of actions. It's a horrific act, and we certainly don't know all of the details, and we're going to have time for investigations on it. But right now, I think everybody in America needs to stop. They need to pause. They need to reflect on what is actually important for us in this political process going forward.
So what does the message, Mr. Secretary, from your view, need to be?
Okay, get more from Rich Lowry here with Megyn Kelly.
Because they showed up at a Trump rally. That's what they did today. That's what Larry and his wife did today, to show up at a Trump rally in Pennsylvania, the heart of the nation, part of the heartland, and probably the most critical state in this election. As in another universe, Rich, we hear every other day that Trump's Hitler, that he's the demon. We hear from the president himself this week that it's time to put a bullseye on Trump. I'm not blaming this on Joe Biden, but I would be remiss in my duty if I did not point out that he just on July 8th said to a group of Democrats whom he was trying to shore up about his mental acuity, quote, "We're done talking about the debate. It's time to put Trump in a bullseye." The left, I mean, the headlines in the New York Times, Rich, when Sarah Palin had what looked like a gun sight on certain districts prior to Gabby Giffords being shot, led to litigation that went on for years about whether she had been the subject of what she called a blood libel. And now you've got the sitting president who's been so loose with his language. He called Kyle Rittenhouse a white supremacist, despite the fact that there was zero evidence for that and none of it was borne out in that trial. And he said it's time to put Trump in a bullseye days ago. It's just totally irresponsible.
Yeah, so if the Sarah Palin standard applies, of course it never does. It only applies to people on the right. President Biden would be blamed for this. Some of the other people on the left would be blamed for this. They shouldn't call Trump a Nazi because, one, it's untrue, and two, it does work people up in a way that's extremely unhealthy and potentially dangerous. So they should stop it, but they never will because it's so useful to them. It makes them feel good. They like the sound of those words coming out of their mouths, and a lot of them have just simply lost their minds. So you'd hope there'd be a return to sanity. You know, on Twitter now, all the statements are, let's cool down the rhetoric. They're not going to, that's going to last 24 hours, and then we're back to the same thing again.
Here's what they're saying, Rich. It's taken the president over an hour to finally put out a statement. Barack.
Okay, this is Anthony
democracy,
Scaramucci,
who thankfully have been blessed to live in democracies our whole lives. You certainly want whatever political battles and the rhetoric of the politics and the policies to be debated and then give the opportunity for the voters to vote. And whoever wins, the other side has to accept that. That's just the nature of these things. But Katty, I just want to say before we go into the analysis, unfortunately, in the United States, this type of political violence is part of our history, unfortunately. We can talk about Abraham Lincoln, Garfield, McKinley. I could list the different people. Of course, Franklin Roosevelt was shot at after he was. But I'm just wondering, from your perspective, your years as a journalist, seeing a bloodstained Donald Trump get up with the Secret Service's help, screaming "fight," blood in his ear, an American flag over his head, the symbolism of all this. What are your thoughts there?
Like you, Anthony, the first reaction is sadness and shock, and obviously for the families there. And also, I think sadness from my point of view, because this historical violence is not historical in American politics. There has been an uptick in political violence, a little heartless and perhaps trite to delve into the longer term ramifications of this incident. But I think we're going to have to do this during this podcast, Anthony, because I think this could potentially change the race.
In Trump's favor?
I think in Trump's favor.
Okay. All right. So let me give a historical reference, give you to react to it, because obviously times have changed. Teddy Roosevelt was shot at. He was running against Woodrow Wilson and William Howard Taft. He had a shot fired at him, hit him in the chest. He had a steel glasses case in his breastplate there, and it protected him. He finished his speech. He said that he was as strong as a bull moose, and a shot like that wouldn't stop him. The party's name became Bull Moose. Everyone said he would go on and win the election. He lost the election. But
he did say there is no place in America for this kind of violence.
Yes.
It's sick. And we
this morning has an op-ed on him, basically saying that his paths to the presidency now are narrowing. If you look at the polling spreads, many of the swing states are now outside of the margin of error.
For Joe Biden, you mean that Joe Biden's paths to the presidency are narrowing?
Yes,
I saw
narrowing,
that.
yes. And so now President Biden would have to win Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. The Democrats call that the blue wall, but those races are mathematically tied, and all he has to do is lose one of those, and he has no path to the presidency. So what do you think happens here? I believe the Biden family is resisting the changes that the Democrats want to make. Insiders have told me as recently as last night that they're extremely frustrated about the situation. There's many people on the Democratic side, the Democrat Party, that basically say, hey, if we had a different candidate, given the track record that they had this 4 years and given the nature of Donald Trump, they'd be 15 points ahead. This probably would have never even happened. But it looks like he's going to lose unless you tell me differently. So what are your thoughts there?
I think these images help Donald Trump, and I can see them appearing, cynical that might sound, in campaign ads going forward.
Do you think that Joe Biden will leave the race, or this will further dig him in to his candidacy?
I think in the short term, this takes.
I agree with you. Mr. Trump, President Trump, is an unbelievable showman, great political instincts, showman instincts to get up and do that. I think some people were like, why is the Secret Service actually letting him do that? Because there could have been other shooters and so on and so forth.
I mean, I'd have been a wreck in a puddle of, mess on the floor of the stage, right? My instincts would have been completely gone to hell and back.
Yeah, listen, enormous grit and credit and courage on his part. I will say that his family members have to be shocked and upset because he's in harm's way, and we'll have to have some type of investigation related to how someone is 450 feet away from him with a gun. Now, thankfully, it was an inexperienced sniper with an AR-15, because an experienced sniper with the right long-range rifle, unfortunately, we would have had we had a tragic ending. People did die, but they would have killed a leading political figure, and this would have been another unbelievable tragedy for America. And so I just think that the narrative is now Trump's. This is Donald Trump's election to lose. He's captured the narrative. People like that or dislike it. It's too bad. You just have to frame it for what it is. He's going into the Republican convention as a wounded, almost martyred candidate for the right. And so he's there now to say, I have literally taken bullets for you people. You have to get out and you have to vote for me. Now, counter oppose that to Joe Biden. He's going to go to his convention, I guess, a month later, malapropping, misspeaking at the teleprompter. Maybe he'll call Kamala Harris Vice President Trump again. He also said Vice President Trump was not qualified to take over for me. He did say that. I mean, that's in the transcript of his remarks. You could see his aides wincing. You want to talk about blinking. Anthony Blinken, appropriately named, was literally shuddering and blinking when Joe Biden was doing that. So you have to be, if you're a Democratic strategist, you have to be sitting here saying, wow, some of this is luck, some of this is surfing. Mitt Romney once said to me after the 2012 election, Caddy, he said, politics is like surfing. There's waves that are coming in. You have your surfboard, which is your platform. Are you a good surfer on your platform? But different waves come in. If there's a conservative movement and a conservative wave and Ronald Reagan is doing a good job surfing, he gets his surfboard to the beach. I was up against Barack Obama.
So Richard Hanania comments, love him or hate him, whatever moral failings he has, Donald Trump is a natural alpha male. That is his appeal. He doesn't hide from interviews. He doesn't flinch in the face of his opponents. And his behavior after getting shot is just part of this lifelong pattern.
The wave was this sort of progressive movement away from conservatism. I flubbed and fell off my surfboard. What wave is hitting the beach right now? And whether people like this or not, Donald Trump is making the waves. Okay, he's creating the narrative. He's framing the narrative. And whether you like it or not, coincidences, universe, whatever, he goes into the Republican convention next week with his right ear bloodied, literally grazed by a bullet. It doesn't even matter, Caddy. If it's grazed by the teleprompter glass or the bullet, it doesn't matter.
He was hurt. There was blood.
Yes, and I took a bullet for you guys. Are you going to come out and vote for me? Yes or no? And now, how has Joe Biden countermand that? It's a good question. I have to think about it more. I honestly don't know. I would have thought he would have said, okay, I got to come out of this race. I'm not at age 81, given my infirmity, given my cognition. I got to toss it up either to my vice president or open up the convention. But we'll see. If he stays in the race, he will go down in history as a guy that really cared more about himself than the country, because he squandered a good presidency, a good agenda, and he squandered it as a result of his Shakespearean ego.
So for the last year, this campaign has been kind of in neutral, right? The two candidates were in the same, that force field that seems to be shifting.
Yeah, I'll add another log to the flyer and perhaps more lighter fluid. while you're saying that, as you pointed out, Elon Musk has endorsed the president, dropped money into his PAC. He obviously controls Twitter. You have 200+ million followers that Elon has. And you can like him or dislike him, but he supported him. Bill Ackman, someone in my industry, the hedge fund industry, just went out and endorsed him. And so the assassination attempt will trigger sympathy and support for Donald Trump. And it will broaden, and it will also create more Trump amnesia, Caddy K. It'll force people to have sympathy, and they'll forget some of the hysteria and the mayhem that he created while president. And in a way, it'll whitewash or wash over some of his deficits, if you will. And by the way, you have nobody on the other side that can make the litigation, that can make the case against him. You just don't. He's not able to. At a debate, he couldn't rebut him. At a debate, he couldn't call out his lies. At a debate, he couldn't say, well, no, you were talking about this, but I reshored manufacturing in the United States. I'm building microprocessor foundries. I put trillions of dollars into infrastructure in the U.S. My legislative agenda in modern history is only second to Lyndon Johnson's first term as president.
You've articulated his agenda and his accomplishments faster.
Okay, we've got a press conference.
I've just spent time speaking to the families, and I want to offer my prayers and the prayers of all 13 million Pennsylvanians for the two individuals who are...
Okay, that's the governor of Pennsylvania. If he says anything interesting, I'll go back to it. All right. This is a former Secret Service agent analyzing the Trump security response.
Element is the counter sniper team. So as far as we know, we see a two-man team from the Secret Service side. As we were discussing prior before we started speaking, they are looking at everything. They have to cover 360 degrees. So I know a lot of folks are like, how could they not see this? I think one of the issues is if it is a two-man team, think about what they are consistently covering. So local law enforcement, definitely, but again, we don't know if somebody was or wasn't positioned. Now, if there was no coverage there whatsoever, that's going to be an issue. Why weren't those adjacent buildings looked at? They are very close, yes.
And if there was somebody stationed there from local law enforcement outside the building where the shooter was, as you consider the possibilities, how could he have gotten up there?
So as I look at this, and again, just from a preliminary assessment without having all the details, it seems to me what I would presume before the president goes up on stage, they secure the area. There's communication. Essentially, are we good to go? Is he good to get up on stage? I would presume that everything was in the clear. I would think that nobody was on that rooftop. What I suspect, and again, I'm suspecting that after he got up on stage, that's when the shooter took position. There's a little bit of a slant at that rooftop. Also, some of the photos show that he's dressed in colors matching that rooftop and building to camouflage a bit himself. So I'm suspecting he took position after President Trump spoke, then engaged.
It's easy in hindsight to say, oh, why wasn't this done or that done? And let's just acknowledge that as we have this conversation. But it is interesting because there were eyewitnesses who said they were actually positioned kind of outside the rally, but were just listening, and that they saw the gunman up with the rifle flying around. They were trying to tell some of the local officials that they saw there. Is there a way to communicate? I mean, these are split-second decisions, but for example, if there had been a state police officer outside on that outer perimeter and someone said, there's a guy up there with a gun, can that message get communicated to Secret Service quickly? Are they all on the same comms?
So really what the issue is, that person that was trying to communicate.
Okay, Fox News now is cut to this news conference from Josh Shapiro. So let's see if there's anything to learn here.
Hey, Paul, let's just put you on hold for a second. The governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, is speaking in Butler. Let's listen in for a second here.
I've just spent time speaking to the families, and I want to offer my prayers and the prayers of all 13 million Pennsylvanians.
Okay, who cares about his prayers? Joe Biden came out very strong. He said the shooting of Donald Trump was inappropriate. Matt Walsh comments, Biden calls the attempted assassination of Donald Trump not appropriate. That's what I say to my kids if they belch at the dinner table. It's not a term you use to describe assassination. This is the weakest, most pathetic man to ever occupy the White House.
But the idea that there's political violence or violence in America like this is just unheard of. It's just not appropriate. I mean, everybody must condemn it. Everybody. I'll keep you informed, and if I...
Not appropriate. Wow, stinging words. Let's see if Josh Shapiro has more substance.
She also asked that I share with all of you that Corey died a hero, that Corey dove on his family to protect them last night at this rally. Corey was the very best of us. May his memory be a blessing. Last night was shocking for this community and for this Commonwealth, and I know for this country. Political disagreements can never, ever be addressed through violence. Disagreements are okay, but we need to use a peaceful political process to settle those differences. This is a moment where all leaders have a responsibility to speak and act with moral clarity, where all leaders need to take down the temperature and rise above the hateful rhetoric that exists and search for a better, brighter future for this nation. That's the work that I try to do every day here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And that's the work that falls to each and every American right now. And so I ask that you join me in prayer for the two Pennsylvanians who are in critical condition, that we continue to wish for a full...
Okay, let's get more analysis here from former Secret Service agent.
Communicate? Were they actually verbally speaking to someone, or were they trying to get somebody's attention? When you're doing these rallies, you're looking at thousands of people. Yeah. How much law enforcement do you have? Do you have one officer or one law enforcement official to what? 1,000? And are they able to get that person's attention? Guys, at the end of the day, too, and I think this is going to come up during the hearing, resources, money, this all costs something. So when you're doing these security advances, you are negotiating. I mean, there are times where I need 75 agents, and it'll come back. It's like, you know what? We don't have the resources or the funds, or we need these folks to be somewhere else. Can you do it with X amount of people? And it's not just the Secret Service. It's going to be law enforcement. Their resources are tapped as well.
So, Evie, quickly, let's talk about the aftermath of the shooting. You see the agents rush the stage, keep the former president on the ground. Then he stands up. What do you see in those images as he pumps his fist to the crowd, exposes himself again, and then moves toward the car?
So if we just break this down as the shooting is happening, we hear the shots being fired. President Trump goes down, he takes cover, and it's also very likely when you look at that banner, there's like this banner around that stage, that tends to be some type of steel that's there by design for an incident like this so that the protectee can hit the ground and take cover. We see the agents come in now from the sides, and their job is, that's the shift. That's what's called the shift. They come in and they are the armor. They're the ones who are literally going to come around. They're going to secure his body. The goal is now, if any additional shots are fired, they take the impact of those shots. They bring him back down. Now you can hear them too. If you're listening to the audio, you can hear them talking on comms. Is it clear? Are we good to go? Because they want to take him from where he's at, and they want to move him to the vehicles. Anytime you're open, and if we look at previous assassinations or assassination attempts, Reagan, JFK, just the most recent ones, always outside, right? Always line of sight issues. So they've got him secure. Once they hear the go, you can go. So I'm assuming for them to get the go, somebody probably told them the threat has been neutralized, right? You're not going to move.
Okay, let's get some commentary here from Fox News.
Detail, you had a textbook response. Get down on top of the protectee, get the protectee out of there as quickly as possible. The counter sniper team, with I think it was a single shot, took out the shooter. But how in the world could the shooter have gotten to that vantage point in the first place?
Well, first of all, Don, I would like to comment about Corey. Corey, you are a hero. This is a man of faith. He went to church every Sunday. I truly believe in my heart that Corey is now in the arms of God, and I just want to offer my condolences to his family. From a law enforcement perspective, this is an epic failure by the U.S. Secret Service. The advance team typically goes in 7 to 10 days before an event, and they survey the area. They do the site assessment, and then they do a sweep of the area, typically 12 hours before the event. How they did not see this roof, which was within 130 yards of where the president would be standing, is unacceptable. And you know what? I want to hear, where is the head of the Secret Service? Where? This is the time to step up and to give Americans reassurance that you're in charge, and they're absent. Frankly, I would like to hear from Director Christopher Wray from the FBI. I want to hear from the head of every single department involved in this, because a former president was potentially killed. There's not been an assassination attempt since Ronald Reagan. This is a big deal. And I have to tell you, the vitriol in this country is awful. It is disgusting. But I can also tell you that there is something going on in these federal agencies that I witnessed myself at the FBI. John, I left the FBI because, in my opinion, they seem to be focused on the wrong things. The U.S. Secret Service, they are stretched thin. I know agents there. They are working their tails off. They work 60 days in a row. They work 12-hour days. They are exhausted. All efforts have to be focused on helping them, giving them the proper resources. Trump's protective detail was immaculate, perfect. They jumped onto President Trump and saved him. But what's going on in the upper level of leadership at these organizations? The rank and file, they're working their tails off. I want to hear from the people at the top. What are you doing? What is your focus? What is the messaging that you're sending down to your agents? Are you giving them the resources that they need to do their jobs? Are you so focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion that you're not focused on the actual task at hand? And that would be my question. I want to hear from the heads of these organizations. If there's a time to speak up, it is now. There was an attempted assassination of former President Trump. I would like to hear from them right now.
Paul, that brings up bigger questions about, the RNC starts in a matter of hours. We're going to head into the thick of election season. We still have the DNC. We've got candidates that want to rally. This brings up huge security concerns. Where do your concerns lie? What needs to happen right now to make sure that we keep the candidates safe, we keep the country safe?
So I have some sourcing telling me that they are pouring in all kinds of resources in response to this, and I'm sure there was plenty of resources going in there to begin with. And, I'm going to zig a little bit while most of us have zagged, me included, which is, we don't necessarily know that there was a political motive to this. And, Nicole referenced Ronald Reagan. Hinckley shot Reagan because he wanted to impress actress Jodie Foster. The guy who shot John Lennon, Chapman, did it because he was a Beatles fan. Sometimes it's just an attempt to become famous, and somebody is really just, off in the head, for lack of a better term. So the idea of dialing down the rhetoric and looking at this right now as a law enforcement effort is the way to go. They have a task force set up. It's going to be a joint federal because we have federal crimes and state crimes, and they're going to be split. The attempt on Donald Trump is going to be federal. That has to go along on the side as they make sure that they keep the RNC safe.
Okay, Susan Crabtree writes for Real Clear Politics. Here's my reporting on why the Secret Service did not shoot until after the shooter engaged. The blowback against the Secret Service started within the hour of the assassination attempts, continued even after Trump and others credited the agency with saving Trump's life by quickly killing a shooter crawling across a nearby rooftop. Source within the Secret Service community tells Real Clear Politics that the agency rules of engagement in this situation is to wait until the president is fired upon to return fire. Those are not the rules of engagement for police, right? Those are not the rules of engagement for security guards, right? You don't allow someone with a knife, all right, with a knife out to get within 20 feet of you, right? You shoot and kill that guy before he even gets within 20 feet of you, right? Someone's got a drawn gun, right? Rules of engagement for police and for private security is that you shoot to kill that guy. So why the heck does the Secret Service have rules of engagement that you don't take out a shooter who's aiming a rifle at the former president of the United States? You want to take a shot, then find out the guy was holding a telescope, the source suggested. The Secret Service is by nature reactive, and you better be right when you do react. Secret Service protocol requires that a counter sniper aware of a potential shooter to radio directly to Intelligence Division team to respond and investigate. In this case, the investigation may have been cut short by the shooter firing his weapon, so the counter sniper then fired as quickly as possible in return. Yeah, he allowed him to get off 8 shots and then fired back. All right, this is insane. The Secret Service protocol is insane that they don't take someone with a gun aiming at that target as seriously as private security. Secret Service just does not seem up to the job. Right? Donald Trump would have been much better off with private security. Private security would not have waited. Right? Ordinary, normal level private security would not wait for someone who's got a drawn weapon on the person that they are supposed to protect. Right? The source of the Secret Service praises the counter sniper who acquired the target and responded within 3 seconds, calling their performance incredible. Right? I think their performance is absolutely dismal. Counter snipers are highly trained and extremely accurate. Look, this guy had the shooter in his sights, and he allowed him to blast away 8 shots before taking him out. Right? Private security wouldn't have allowed this. Police would not have allowed this. Right? This is outrageous. Right? It seems more and more obvious now that Donald Trump would be much safer with private security than with the Secret Service. It's just simply not up to the job. Right? They are incompetent. Their protocols have no connection to reality. All right. As things stands right now, Donald Trump would be far safer with private security than with these idiots at the Secret Service.
Make sure that the rhetoric stays low, go forward as Americans maturely here. But I will say this, we need answers. We need to be communicated to regularly with regular updates and press briefings, because in the vacuum is where the conspiracy theories grow, and that is where the political rhetoric overheats. Let's get a good law enforcement investigation going that's transparent. And frankly, I am glad that Representative Comer has already announced that he's putting in some oversight, because I trust the FBI agents on the ground. I trust Secret Service agents on the ground. What I don't trust is their overhead in Washington. Not after seeing some of the stuff that we've seen relative to Crossfire Hurricane and the 51 people who endorsed the laptop, and Matt Colangelo leaving DOJ to go for lawfare against Donald Trump at the Manhattan DA's office. I'm sorry, but there's just been too much of that for me to put my full faith in our leaders in D.C., who, by the way, we're not hearing from now.
Well, apparently we are going to hear from the president in about an hour. He's scheduled to speak at 1:30. Nicole, final question to you. After Ronald Reagan was shot on the 30th of March, 1981, outside the Washington Hilton, the Secret Service completely changed its security protocols. Reagan had been walking out in the open. The Secret Service said no more presidents walking out in the open as they're transitioning to the limousine. They put the president under cover. We see those tents that are outside of venues. The limousine will pull in. The president will go in under cover. How do you expect the protocols are going to change as a result of what happened yesterday?
Well, I sure hope that they change drastically, because this can never happen again in our country. Again, like we talked about, the vitriol is at an all-time high, and there are people that are taking out their frustration with political violence, and again, that's not okay. So I would say that potentially, outdoor events, those are extremely difficult for law enforcement to oversee, because again, you would hope that those buildings would be protected and that they would have done a very successful advance and not have this occur. But that's going to be up to them to decide. But that's why we need to hear from leadership. Where are you? We would like to hear from you and what you have to do. The FBI is now the lead investigator on the assassination attempt, and they've sent in their best from Quantico, their flight team, people that are reconstructing the scene is going to be extremely thorough. But I'm with Paul. I believe in the rank and file agents. I was a rank and file agent, but the leadership, you need to step up and you need to start taking accountability and getting your agencies in order and giving them the proper resources that they need to do their job successfully and focus on nothing but the mission of protecting American people and people like former President Trump. That is it. Nothing else should be on the forefront of their minds. That is it.
Well, it's obviously on the mind of the president. We are told following his briefing this morning with Homeland Security and law enforcement officials at the White House, he and the vice president met with them. The president will be speaking live from the Roosevelt Room. We have just gotten this word, live 1:30 p.m. Eastern time. So about an hour from now, we'll carry that here live. Paul Morrow, Nicole Parker, thank you very much for joining us. And by the way, Don, we also could get an update from the FBI. We were told we'll be looking for all of these updates as they come in. Meanwhile, Speaker Mike Johnson says the House will conduct a full investigation into what lead.
Okay, let's leave it there for now. Talk to you blokes later.